Welcome to the 2018 WILMIC Summer Seminar. We appreciate you all coming today. In addition to all of you in this room, we have over 100 folks watching live on the web. And I will mention to those folks, if you have a question or comment, there's a tab on your screen. I believe it's labeled Ask a Question. That's where you can ask a question. So you click on that and you can submit a question. We will get it and we will present it to the room and we'll talk about it. So this program has been approved for 3 CLE ethics credits. And you in the room all have an evaluation sheet in the back of your materials. And I would ask that before you leave at the end of the day today, if you could fill that out for us. We always appreciate hearing from you as to what we're doing well, what we could do better, topics in the future that you might be interested in, and things like that. So if you could take a minute to fill that out, that would be great. For those of you on the web, you will get an email next week, maybe even by the end of the day today, with the same questions. And if you could submit that to us, that would be very helpful. So without further ado, I'll just mention the first half of the program today will be our keynote speaker, who I'll introduce in a moment. Jay is going to be talking very practically about the practice of law and branding and marketing and getting your name out and things of that nature. He's a storyteller, and I think you'll find him very interesting and fun to listen to. And then we'll take a break around 10:15. And at 10:30 we'll reconvene. We'll have a panel of practitioners up here, and then we'll get into some practical material, what's working in your practice, what are the challenges, and we can kick that around. I would urge all of you to participate. If you have questions or comments, jump right in. We will have someone with a microphone in the back. Before you ask your question, allow her to get to you. Since it is on video, we want to make sure the web folks can hear you. But please feel free to jump in. This should be interactive. When we all talk about these issues, we all learn something. So again, thank you very much for being here. So Jay Reeves is our keynote speaker this morning. Jay graduated from law school in 1981. He has practiced in North Carolina and South Carolina. During the course of his career, he has been a sole practitioner, a corporate lawyer, a legal editor, a legal aid attorney, and an insurance risk manager. Did I get them all? Anything else?
I can't hold a job.
Okay, all right, good. Well, we're glad you're here. Today, Jay is the owner of Your Law Life. It's an organization that helps lawyers with messaging, marketing, and reclaiming the passion for what they do. And so that's one of the reasons we're here. We want to talk about that. Jay is available for consultations, retreats, and presentations. And so without further ado, let me introduce Jay Reeves.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I am delighted to be here. And I want to thank Wisconsin Lawyers Mutual, Katya and Tom specifically for inviting me here. Glad to be here. I really hope this goes well. My self-esteem could use a little boost. I just learned that apparently there's some CrossFit international competition going on. And all of the participants are staying in my hotel. So I come on and off the elevator, and I see these incredibly beautiful and ripped men and women. And so I say, are you here for CrossFit? And they all say, yeah. And not a single one ever asked me, you here for the CrossFit thing? So I am from Chapel Hill, as Tom said. We who live there fondly and quite modestly call Chapel Hill Blue Heaven. And everybody I told that I was coming to Madison said, oh, you'll love Madison. It's just like Chapel Hill. I'm not sure Madison wants to claim that distinction. Chapel Hill is home to the University of North Carolina, as you may know. Duke University is right down the street. Research Triangle Park is right there. Some of the world's largest biotech engineering firms. It's unlike any other place in North Carolina. It's so different. The rest of the state is rural, agricultural, sparsely populated. It's so different that some years ago, when the General Assembly was debating building a new state zoo, one representative stood up and said, we don't need a new state zoo because that's how everybody talks in North Carolina. They talk like this, and they point a lot. They point. We don't need a new state zoo. All we got to do is build a fence around Chapel Hill. Well, Chapel Hillians took that as a great compliment. And speaking of backhanded compliments, I have to tell you that I've been here before. I gave a talk to the Wisconsin Bar before, 20 years ago. 1998, it was July 10th. I looked up the date. And back then I was working for Lawyers Mutual of North Carolina. It's the WILMIC counterpart in North Carolina. I was invited. I gave an ethics talk. I think it was in Waukesha, Erickstown. And I think it went well. I mean, people clapped at the end. And I remember Kachi came up to me. Tom, I don't think, was with the company. Kachi came to me and said, "Hey, Jay, you did okay. We'll have to have you back sometime." I said, "Anytime, name it. Had a great trip." A year went by. 2 years went by. A decade goes by. So much time that the Boston Red Sox won 3 world championships, right? Tom is a Red Sox fan. And then in 2018, I get invited back. So I look forward to seeing you all again in 2038. And I hope to give you 20 years worth of good stuff here. I'm going to talk this morning about happy clients. Happy clients pay their bills, at least this is my experience when I practice. They pay their bills, they refer their friends, and they don't sue their lawyers. I think we would all agree those are 3 good things. And I'll let you in on a little secret, which you already know, so it's not a secret. Happy clients don't just materialize out of thin air. They're not bought off a shelf. They are cultivated. They're nurtured. And they are attracted to happy, and I would say, healthy lawyers. So we're going to spend just as much time talking about being a happy, healthy, motivated lawyer as we are about happy clients. Happy clients also sometimes give us gifts, give us things, teach us about life in ways other than just paying their bills and not suing us. So I'd like to open with a little story of a client that I had who was a happy client. This client made me happy. And this client gave me one of the best gifts anybody has ever given me in my life. This was back when I was just starting in practice. I had a solo practice. Is anybody solo practitioners out here? Colleen, we met earlier, right? It's hard. It's hard. And back when I started, I spent most of my days looking out the window waiting for clients to show up. And they rarely did. What few clients I did have fell into one of 2 categories. They were either clients who had been turned down by every other lawyer in town, and we know where they go, and or they were clients who had been referred by my mother, who felt sorry for me, and said, "Go see Jay. He'll help you out, and he won't even charge you." So, and then there was one client, Mr. H, the initial H. Mr. H came to me first with a speeding ticket, and I remember how shaken he was, having gotten a traffic ticket. He was an elderly gentleman, lived alone, wife was deceased, his children were grown. 60-year clean driving record, first ticket he'd ever gotten. "Please, sir, can you help me?" I don't know. This could be a tough one. I'll see what I can do. So a month, 6 weeks later, I came back from traffic court, had gotten the case dismissed. He was overjoyed. He was thrilled. I was the best lawyer in the world. I can't believe it. Of course, what I really did was I stood in line at the courthouse for about 90 minutes until I could see the assistant district attorney and gave her this spotless driving record and a little sob story, and they dismissed the ticket. But I didn't tell Mr. H that. I did not dissuade him of the opinion that I was the greatest lawyer ever. And after that, he became a regular. Sometimes he would call for appointments. Other times he would just show up. And he would always have a sort of legal reason for coming to see me. But I came to see, often it was a pretext. I remember once he had an insurance claim form. He wanted me to help him fill it out. He could have probably done it himself, but it seemed to reassure him that I was there helping him. Another time he called and said, "I got this legal notice in the mail." And I said, "Oh my gosh, bring it in." Well, it turned out to be a solicitation, junk mail, saying, "You are hereby summoned to apply for a loan," or whatever. So I ripped that up. And he thought I was the greatest lawyer. He just tore it up. Problem solved right there. Most of our time we spent talking about the weather, politics, life, the Atlanta Braves. We both love the Braves. And I felt bad about billing him sometimes. I mean, what would the State Bar think? We're here in the beautiful State Bar building here. I'm guessing they would think just like North Carolina. What would they think about billing a client for talking about Tom Glavine and Chipper Jones for an hour, right? You know, but Mr. H always insisted on paying, and often he would write the check right there before he left the office. He was a dream client, and in truth, I think he got value from meeting with me, if only to be reassured that you're doing fine. You know, don't worry about it, or stop doing what you're doing. Your instincts are right. And I know I got value because he was a good client, came in, paid his bills. Time passed, I began getting a few more clients. I started learning about something called marketing. I went to one program and they said, oh, you got to send Christmas cards to your clients. Marketing, that's a brilliant idea. So I ordered Christmas cards, envelopes, and not only that, I ordered refrigerator magnets that had my picture on it. And I stacked the cards and the envelopes and the magnets on my desk. But I never got around to mailing them, sending them out, because it takes work, you know. It's easy to come up with that idea. Christmas is approaching. At home, things are chaotic. I'm married. I have 5 children. Don't ask. 5 young children, so things are kind of crazy. Christmas approaching. Clients want things wrapped up before the end of the year. And I have this marketing project languishing on my desk. I remember rushing one night to get out of the office for a Christmas pageant probably, or some sort of function, and who should I run into in the lobby but Mr. H. He comes ambling in, my dream client. And my heart sank, you know. Didn't he know how busy I was? I don't have time to talk about the Braves right now. But he was my dream client. And he says, oh, I don't mean to take up your time, I just brought you a Christmas card. And I said, oh, I got one for you. So I ran back to my office, filled out a card, threw in a couple of refrigerator magnets, because he was a great client. He gets 2 magnets. Because isn't that what everyone wants, right, for Christmas? A magnet with their lawyer's face on it, you know? That's what everyone wants. So I came out, and when I walked out into the lobby, I found Mr. H sound asleep in one of the chairs in the lobby. Didn't he know how busy I was? I've got a million things to do. How rude of him. My first thought was to jerk him up and throw him out of the office. But he was my dream client. So what I did was collapse in the chair beside him. I was exhausted, had a million things to do. And I closed my eyes for just a moment. And that's when, unwittingly, Mr. H gave me the great gift. Because he made me stop. He made me stop doing so much stuff. And I closed my eyes, and I could feel my heart racing, my mind whirring, and I could feel the tension sort of draining from my body just sitting there. And that was the great gift Mr. H gave me. It's also a gift that keeps on giving. So at the risk of alienating this crowd, I would like to offer it to you. It will only take 60 seconds or so. So you can sit right where you are. You can close your eyes. You don't have to close them if you don't want to, if that's too weird. I know it will help me to do this. So I have to stand. So already I'm at a disadvantage. But let's just close our eyes and sit. And we'll breathe in. And a full exhalation, breathe out. Breathe in. Notice the air cool as it comes through the nostril, and breathing out. Slightly warmer. Breathe out through your mouth. And be aware of your presence in this room. The sensation of sitting in your chair. Notice how your body feels. Your feet on the floor. Pay attention to your hands, perhaps. They're in your lap. Maybe they're on the desk in front of you. Breathing in, breathing out. Now shift slightly to your thoughts. You may be thinking of work back at the office that you should be tending to. Just notice those thoughts. You maybe came here straight from home, and your thoughts are on some issue good or bad, that you left back at the house. Notice your reaction to me, to the sound of my voice. Because you have a reaction, whether you are aware of it or not. So we're breathing in, and we're breathing out, and we're collecting ourselves. And you can open your eyes now. There's probably worse ways to get CLE credit, right, than sitting quietly. If you get nothing more from my program, and it's possible you won't get anything more, at least take that back to your office and to your life. Stop occasionally. Give yourself that gift to stop. We do so much. Lawyers, we get paid to do stuff. Sometimes stop, slow down, just be. We're pulled in a million directions, and that's an apt metaphor because we do lead fragmented lives. Often we're sitting talking to a client in the conference room. We're physically there, but our mind is on an appointment that afternoon. And our heart, our passion may be somewhere else altogether, not in this room at all, not in this practice at all, perhaps. So we're fragmented. So give yourself the gift of pulling it all together. I think we're going to talk in the panel more about some work-life balance and keeping it all together. So important for you to be happy and healthy. Back to the Mr. H story, because this is continuing legal education and not a mindfulness seminar after all. What, if any, lessons can we learn from that story about practicing law, having a healthy law life? What if any, lessons? Yes?
I think at the very base of it, that we are ultimately still human beings. Even as we're lawyering and serving and running around, we're human beings, and so are our clients. And that's an inherent connection.
That's awesome. And your name? Joanne. Thank you for sharing that. We're human beings, not human doings, and lawyers tend to be doers. Just being present. I know that had value to Mr. H. He told me it did. Just being there sometimes, that's all. Knowing I had his back. And Joanne, for being bold enough to speak up first, you didn't know you'd get prizes today, did you, for speaking up? No. That's coming at Christmas. It's even better. Because before I went to law school, I was a top 40 radio disc jockey in South Carolina, radio station WKSP, South Carolina Station of the Year, back in the 70s. Can you believe it? And I brought a few records. And you win, just for participating, you win Perry Como, I'll Be Home for Christmas. All right, this is called incentive. Oh, and you're coming up to claim your prize.
Thank you.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. I will leave your gifts up here. I have many more prizes. Many more prizes. They're called bribes. It's bribery. This is the interactive portion. So yes, just being. Any other, what about my role? Let's drill down a little more. What about my role with Mr. H? What was I doing with him? I didn't prepare many. I went to court once, so I was an advocate then. What else? What did I do for him? What would you say my role was with him? Yes?
Thank you. I think you were more of an advisor for him, or at the risk of sounding too touchy-feely, like a therapist. Like, oh, no, you're okay. It's all good. And I think that there is a lot of that in law. You're fine. You're good. I'm okay. You're okay.
Totally.
Okay. Yep.
I'm not a therapist, by the way. Listen, I don't want to be sued for practicing, but totally. And you win Eddie money, 2 tickets to paradise. I'm just going to leave it up here for all of you. You got to remember your records. Advisor. I think the Wisconsin Rule of Professional Conduct is one of the very first rules, different roles of lawyers, and one is advisor, counselor. The older I get, the more I see that's really the bedrock of everything we do is counseling. And I was lucky enough, and that's a wonderful role. If anybody's ever been in therapy, and I'm not going to say that whether I have or haven't, what do they do most of? What does your therapist do most of the time? They're sitting there in the corner, listening. They're not doing anything. They're not running around. But it's valuable. It has inherent value. And I was lucky enough to have my first boss said, Jay, here's, as a young lawyer here, here's something I want to tell you. Some of the best advice you'll ever give a client is to tell them to forget about whatever they're doing, go home, hug their children, have a great day, just forget about it. Don't go down this path. I think too often we don't do that as counselors. That's valuable. Okay, so role as counselor. Any other comments on Mr. H before we get into the meat of the program? So, happy clients pay their bills. Once upon a time, and I'm old enough to remember, the law was a seller's market. Those were the good old days. We determined who could sell legal services and products, what qualifications were required, what the punishment was if you did it without having those qualifications. We determined how you could market your services. You couldn't advertise. We could even determine the pricing. Minimum fee schedules. Bar associations had minimum recommended fees, and you could actually be disciplined by the State Bar of Wisconsin. I don't know if that's literally true. Some bars disciplined attorneys for deviating, undercutting the fee schedules. Can you believe that? That's wonderful, isn't it? Get in trouble if you don't charge enough. Wonderful. Well, everything has changed now. Partly has changed because my screen went blank. And you don't need me to tell you about the new pressures that are out there. All new sorts of competitors in the field, LegalZoom. Some of them aren't even flesh and blood people. LegalZoom, Avvo. Technology has changed the pace, the nature of practice. All of these changes result in clients having more choices. Professor Barry Schwartz came up with the notion of the tyranny of choice. We think choice is wonderful, but it can create anxiety. So clients come to you, they're already anxious because they had 1 million lawyers to choose and they picked you. And guess what choice also does? It raises expectations. I picked you out of 1 million, so you better be good. So their expectations may be totally out of whack. So it's not always a good thing, choice. Clients are empowered. They have tools now. They can go to LegalZoom. They can do things themselves that previously they would have to come to you. Advertising, back in the day, you couldn't advertise. So if you were the only lawyer in town, clients didn't really have much choice. All changed now. And of course, the law firm model has changed. I wrote an article just a week or two ago on mergers and acquisitions. Already in 2018, there have been 3 new law firms in the U.S. that have more than 1,000 lawyers. 1,000 lawyers or more have been created due to mergers. There'll probably be 6 before the year end, and that's a trend that's been going on. So consolidation at the top and down at the solo level, virtual practices. You can practice in your bedroom. Advertising can suddenly bring in business. So it's no longer a seller's market. It's a buyer's market. Jordan Furlong is a thought leader from Canada. He has a book on this. The law is a buyer's market. His website is Law 21. I've had the pleasure of seeing Jordan speak a few times. So, in this buyer's market, how do you survive and thrive? Because I'm guessing all of you want to survive, and you want to thrive. And I don't mean just financially. I mean you want to have a great law life. Differentiate your brand. Show why you're different. Jordan says clients expect cheaper, faster, or better. And cheaper is not necessarily derogatory. It might mean you're more efficient. You can do things quicker. You use your staff, perhaps. You leverage technology and leverage personnel and you can do it at a cheaper price. So differentiate. And for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll talk about 3 specific ways you can differentiate. You can stand out. You can survive and thrive. One is by putting clients first, having a robust online presence, and telling your story, which I'm going to refer to as messaging. Telling your story. And we'll start with the third one first. Tell a great story. Storytelling and law arise from the same bed. I didn't know the author of Grimm's fairy tale was also a practicing attorney. But I guess that makes sense. That's why I guess he wrote stories about kids throwing grandma in the oven and wolves, everywhere. Also a lawyer, storytelling. Litigators get it, right? Litigators get the importance of story, but all practice areas. Story, it's all about story. What is a bankruptcy case but a story of financial ruin? What is a divorce case but love gone bad and anxiety as a result? And to the extent you first listen to the client's story and then present a counter story that meshes beautifully with theirs and hopefully has a happy ending, you're going to have a successful relationship. The main character is always the client, not you. Many firms I consult with, they haven't figured that part out. So their website, everything is all about them, how wonderful they are, how qualified they are. And they are wonderful and qualified. But that's not the story that consumers want to hear. They want to hear, how can you help me? How can you make my life better? How can you get rid of this huge problem? This traffic ticket, oh my gosh. That was an easy one. How can you make your life better? One tip is to open strong. Here's the opening sentence from a novel. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into an enormous insect. Who can tell me what novel? And if you've already been a winner, you're disqualified from winning again. Let's give everybody a chance. Who can tell me what novel and or author?
Kafka, Metamorphosis.
Kafka, Metamorphosis. Tell me your name, sir.
John.
John, you win Journey. Don't stop believing. So what does that opening tell you right there about the novel? First, it's going to be a weird story, right? This isn't a romance. This isn't a love story. No surprises. You see what you're getting right up front. I would suggest the same with your first contact with a potential client. That first phone call, that first interview really sets a tone. I came to see that after years of practicing. And if it starts off poorly, that's a bad sign. And I used to always say, well, we can fix it. We can turn this thing around. But often they don't get turned around. It just gets worse, maybe temporarily. So if things aren't good from the start, if you don't feel you're on the same page, there's that story again, just be aware of that. Here's an opening to a story on a website. Full disclosure, I wrote this opening for this client, Manning Fulton, one of the most established law firms in North Carolina. They are, the founder, Mr. Manning, was one of the first law deans at the University of North Carolina. Mr. Fulton wrote the book on real estate law, so it doesn't come any deeper roots than that. But that's not the whole story for this firm, because deep roots to some people might not have such a positive connotation. What might it suggest? Old, established, deep roots. We've been here forever. What that might suggest to some client? Excuse me? Stodgy. That's a descriptive word. Stodgy. Anything else? How about on a price level? What might that suggest?
Expensive.
That you're expensive. You've got this huge building. You're a big important lawyer. You drive the big cars. You're expensive. But that's not the whole story. So modern insights. We're hip. We're up to date. We've got all the new tools, which this firm does, by the way. It's a superb firm. And also we focus on what matters. Think about taglines. We call that a tagline. Taglines are great. Taglines, sometimes you can come up with a headline and then the tagline can add a little nuance to it or drill a little deeper to your message. We focus on what matters. What matters to whom? The client. No records for that because you should all be on there. Here's a tip number 2, a messaging tip. Avoid talking like a lawyer as much as possible, at least when you're talking to clients. Wisconsin RPC 2.1, advice couched in narrow legal terms may be of little value. It's okay to refer to relevant moral, ethical considerations in giving advice. Again, I think that's one of the more satisfying roles of being a lawyer is just to be a counselor, to bring some moral and ethical views. And yeah, technically you could do this. You can do this. But it's a bad idea. Or it would be wrong. We could do this, but that would be wrong. So, talk straight sense, common sense, and keep it simple. Keep it simple. Speak and write like a 10th grader. The Flesch-Kincaid test. Anybody know what the Flesch-Kincaid test? It sounds erotic, doesn't it? I like the sound of that test. But really all it does is it's a linguistic tool for analyzing words or written or verbal. And you're assigned a grade according to the Flesch-Kincaid test, according to the complexity of the concept. Applying the Flesch-Kincaid test to the average speech of our representatives in Washington, they grade out at 10.6. Not necessarily a bad thing. Give me liberty or give me death is a grade 6.6. So it's not bad. It means everybody can get it. Even little kids can understand this. Nothing wrong with that. I Have a Dream. The Martin Luther King speech, I think grades out 7 or 8. So simplicity is good. Keep it simple. And here's another tip. If you only come away with stop what you're doing, get a copy of Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. It's one of my favorite books. You can just read it for pleasure. It tells you everything you know about writing and reading, everything I know about writing and reading I got from this book. They say things like, keep it simple, avoid long sentences, and never ever use irregardless. It's not a word. And if you don't believe it, look up Strunk and White. Another tip, keep it real. We tend to think and talk like this. On or about the 27th of November, the plaintiff was driving her vehicle within the posted speed limit in a westerly direction. Pretty abstract. I mean, it's got the information there, but it's pretty abstract. I don't really get a picture. Do you get a picture in your head? Not really. How about this? Just before Thanksgiving, kindly Aunt Edna was puttering down Main Street in her Buick Electra. You got a picture, right? But there's something wrong with that example. There's something very, very wrong. Strunk and White would say there's something wrong. Can anybody identify what's wrong with that example? It has to do with the Buick Electra. I don't think you putter in a Buick Electra. I think it sort of rumbles and roars. Pardon me? There you go. Thank you. She putters along. She's barely moving. Onlooker experiment. Stanford conducted this wonderful experiment in which they showed a short videotape of a car crash. Any accident lawyers here? Auto accident lawyers? PI lawyers? Oh, come on. We have some PI lawyers here. They showed a videotape of a car crash. There was no sound on the tape, but a researcher was sitting there beside the monitor narrating. And the researcher at the point of impact said to Group A, you will see here the cars smash into each other. Group B, you will see the cars come into contact with each other. The groups were later asked to estimate the speed of the vehicles at the time of collision. Group A said they were going pretty fast. They smashed into each other, 40 miles an hour or higher. Group B, they just came into contact. It was probably Aunt Edna, right? Came into contact 30 miles an hour or less. Same video. They watched the same thing. One verb different. Well, I guess two verbs. One difference. So think about that. And then, even more interestingly, they brought the group back the next day after the memory had faded a little bit of what they had seen, and they asked Group A, do you remember seeing any broken glass in the scene, the smashed group? Oh yeah, it was glass everywhere. Group B, that come into contact, did you see any broken glass? No, I don't recall seeing any broken glass. A fascinating study of how words matter, your messaging matters. Here's the home page of a website that paints a picture. Small law. It isn't the quality of the law being delivered by this firm. The name of the attorney is Small. Small but better. So there you go. It says it right there. I'm better. Cheaper, faster, better. Here's another example of a picture that a lawyer has painted on his website to great effect. A little background, again, full disclosure, I've worked with this client. His name is Gary Poole. If you're a PI lawyer and want to know about marketing, don't listen to me. Call Gary Poole in North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's brilliant. Gary does accident cases, and he specifically represents a lot of motorcycle riders, drivers, who are in accidents. And he represented a driver some years ago who had a habit of riding with his dog Chewy on the back of his bike. That's a picture of Chewy there. Chewy has a helmet and goggles, and Chewy's in a lot of parades, the owner. Loves riding around with Chewy. They were in an accident. The driver had, I think, 2 broken legs. But more importantly, Chewy emerged unscathed. So Chewy was fine. So what happened is Chewy and the driver did a testimonial for Gary Poole, my lawyer. And it's narrated by Chewy. My lawyer was Gary Poole. He did a great job. I recommend you go to Gary Poole. So when I first met Gary, you can actually see Gary's picture right under there. I cut it out because we don't need to see him. When I first went to him on his website, he had a huge picture of him. He's a handsome man, looked great. I thought, well, what's that doing there, Gary? What story does that say? That's your Gary Poole. Buried somewhere in the practice area or About Us page was this video that he had done. I didn't do this for him. I'd like to claim credit. Buried in his website. I said, you got to pull that out and put it on page 1, man. I said, do people like that video? He said, oh yeah, everybody loves the Chewy video. You know, it's on YouTube. It gets, you know. I said, well, put it on page 1. And I think within a week of putting it to page 1, he was interviewed by the local paper. Actually, they were more interested in interviewing Chewy, of course, than Gary. But hey, it's a great message, a great picture, having fun with it. Pay attention to your telling without talking. We all tell without talking. Dr. Albert Mehrabian from UCLA is sort of the expert in body language, nonverbal cues. His studies have found that 93% of our opinions and feelings about what we hear come from the tone of voice and the nonverbal cues, the presentation of the speaker. And only 7% come from what is actually spoken. And we know from experience that that's true. You go back to your office or you're interviewing a client. The client comes in and you say, is anything wrong? No, everything's fine. Okay, 7% words, everything's fine. But of course, you know, everything else is screaming you're unhappy about something. And hopefully you're not unhappy with me, you know. So pay attention to the nonverbal cues, which you all do in your own practices. You're the experts of your own practices, not me. These are just some tips, some reminders of things you probably already know. Emerson says, who you are, shout so loudly, I cannot hear what you are saying. So your presentation, starting with that first contact, and if it's online, it should be a really powerful and compelling, deep roots, modern insights, Chewy the biker dog, you know. This applies to everything, office decor, parking, color schemes. We don't put as much thought, perhaps, as we should into these things. We may have busier, more profitable practices. I remember when I was a young lawyer, before I learned that I was not cut out to do family law, I had a divorce case, and the opposing counsel was known as the meanest lawyer in town. We called him Vlad the Impaler. And I had to go meet with Vlad about this case. And I remember I sat in his waiting room, and he has these magazines. And all the magazines were guns and ammo, and bow hunter, dog and gun. And I'm just thinking, my gosh, what message is this sending to me? I was terrified before I even went to meet Vlad. Parking. Is it easy to get to your office? Is it accessible to folks? My brother has a very simple rule when it comes to evaluating restaurants. If he has to walk more than 100 yards from his car to the restaurant, it's a terrible restaurant. It doesn't matter if it's the best food in town. I had to walk 2 blocks. So McDonald's to him is just great, you know. You don't even have to get out of your car. It's beautiful. Color schemes. Colors make a difference. Colors tell us something, tell a story. Blue, for example, has been tested as being solemn and authoritative. You'll notice my whole slideshow is blue. Solemn and authoritative. Red is excitable and passionate. So think about your colors. I would say if there's one mistake attorneys make who want to grow their practices, and many are very happy with where they are, but if you want to grow your practice, one mistake is to ask for business. Attorneys aren't always that good about it. The ABA Legal Tech Survey 2017 found that most new business comes from word-of-mouth referrals, not from blogs, not from websites. Comes the old-fashioned way. I've got a great lawyer. Go see Gary Poole. He helped me out. Word-of-mouth referrals. I think you should have the following marketing priorities. First, your current clients. Number two, former clients, then referral sources, people you know and people you don't know. Where do you think most attorney advertising and marketing money is spent? Attracting which group?
People you don't know.
Sarah? You're good. She's on the panel coming up. You're going to get more of her. This is where most lawyers spend their money and their energy and their effort. And I'm not saying it's a waste of time, but look at all of the opportunities you may be passing up. Current clients do a wonderful job. What are some other ways you can market to current clients? Ones you got right now. What are some other ways? Ask if there's anything else you can do. A magnet with your face on it. I'm not sure how much work you're going to get from that. Ask if there's anything else you can do. They may not know that you also can do a will for them. So ask if there's something else you can do. Former clients are often neglected. We send them Christmas cards. Does anybody send Christmas cards? It's a good idea. I'm not making fun of Christmas cards. We send our former clients. We may have a database. But I know a lawyer who rents a local theater in Chapel Hill one Saturday afternoon and now has hundreds and hundreds in the database, sends out these very nice little invitations for a movie day. Movie day on me. There's a kiddie matinee. Bring your kids, bring your neighbors and friends. And the lawyer is there. Pays for the popcorn. Former clients come. Always picks up business from that one movie day. Doesn't cost a lot of money. The old-fashioned way. Referral sources. How often do you get in touch with people or entities that have sent you business in the past? Make a list of the 10 top referral sources and stay in front of them. You know, take them out to lunch. Schedule one each week. You're going to have a lunch with one of these that sent me business, and then don't be shy of saying, hey, anything I can do for you, and is there anything you can do for me? And then people you know, follow up. You meet somebody new and you give them a business card and say, call me, then follow up with a note. You know, nice meeting you. Makes all the difference. If you have a website, it's probably a good idea to have a call to action. Call to action is simply an invitation for the viewer to take one additional step to engage your services instead of just seeing your wonderful website. And I recommend, you know, a typical call of action says, click here to do what? Free consultation. You get Stevie Winwood, roll with it. And your name is? Bill. Bill. Offers a free consultation. Nothing wrong with that. Lots of buttons say, click here to do what? That's kind of a dumb question, dumb way to phrase it. Click here to talk to a lawyer, or to talk to someone now. I'm not so sure those are the best things, that's the best approach. Why? Because some people will not call. They just don't like to call. And my children are 5 of those people. They never call. But they will respond to an email. You know, if I text them, they'll text right back. But they just aren't going to, something about calling. Here's a nice call to action from this is not a group that I've worked with. I think I think they're in Minnesota. But I like it's a clever, it's attention catching, and it says, take action now, click right here. And they also tell exactly what they're going to do. They represent fathers, remove the custody drama for fathers. So you know what you're getting into. Here's another call of action from a bankruptcy firm. And look at this, man. Calls of action everywhere. You click everywhere on here, and you're invited to take one additional engagement step. I particularly like that orange block at the bottom. Help me get my life back now. You know, who's not going to click that, right? I want my life back. I'm clicking here. The point is, you're not just giving information. You're asking them to come to you in some non-threatening way. Some won't pick up the phone and call. Some don't want to chat right now, but they may download a free guide on how to do a will or a free strategy brochure on bankruptcy, something like that. So, messaging, telling a good story is part one. Differentiation, part two. I should stop right now because I'm talking too much. Does anybody have any comments on telling a story or experiences of your own, stories that have worked, or tips you want to share? Yes, please.
I want to ask you about my tagline. So my tagline is, dare to have a good divorce. Is that okay?
I like it. I like it.
You want to repeat that, Jay, so the web viewers can hear it?
The question is, and your name?
Diane.
Diane, thank you. Thank you, Diane.
Do I get a record?
A little pushy there, Diane. You not only get a record, but since I'm from North Carolina, you're going to get the Charlie Daniels Band. What this world needs is a few more rednecks. I think the important thing for a tagline's just a few words, you deserve a break today. What, advertisers understand the power of taglines. So I like dare to have
A good divorce.
dare to have a good divorce. Because many consumers, I'm guessing, thinks there's no such thing as a good divorce, right? Yeah. So you're telling a happy ending. You're suggesting it can have a happy ending. Okay? And I would say use whatever works. You want to talk to people. What do you like about my website? Talk to other people. It doesn't have to be clients. Ask outsiders. Any other thoughts? That's great. Thank you. Telling a story, things that have worked for you, marketing, or hearing client stories, tips we can share. Ready to plow forward? Second tip is to have a robust online presence. In our panel discussion, I will share more of my thoughts about online presence, because guess what? The older I get, the older school I get, and I think the old-fashioned ways may end up working a lot better than paying a lot of money for websites and social media. We can talk about that later. Having said that, it is out there. And you have to have a presence, if only for cred. Kevin O'Keefe is sort of a leading blogger type. He says the internet and social media are accelerators of relationships and word of mouth. They don't create it. They can help speed it up. So Gary Poole's message can get out to more people through his website. And Diane's tagline can reach more people and touch more people. Here's some stats from the ABA survey. 65% of attorneys have websites. 25% have blogs. One half said they have gotten a new case from their blog in the last, I think it was 12 months. Most were unsure. The other half was unsure. I think a slightly higher majority, a slight majority were unsure. Does anybody have a blog experience they would like to share, good or bad? There's a record for you. If you do blog, you're going to want to find out, is this how you came to me? This is how you got to know me. Social media, 52% of lawyers are on LinkedIn, 40% Facebook, 30% Twitter. Again, in the panel group, if anyone is interested, I have some experience working with law firms on social media consulting. So I have some thoughts about that. The goal of your online presence is to engage the client. It's engagement. Here's a lawyer in North Carolina who loves barbecue and is a barbecue expert. Can anyone tell me what the two types of barbecue are in North Carolina? There's sort of two basic types. We're not in North Carolina then. There's a Western mustard base. Vinegar based. Eric, you don't get a record because you're on the panel. You do get a record, Eric. Billy Joel, you may be right. And you are right. Vinegar-based is eastern North Carolina. Mustard-based is sort of the western part of the state. Anyway, this guy, Sean Ingersoll, loves barbecue, knows all about it, goes out and reviews restaurants, posts recipes, and he will tell you that he gets more interaction from his barbecue. Nobody calls him for a lawyer, but they all love his barbecue stuff. it's driving traffic to him, to his website. At least he's out there, right? Here's a fascinating rule that the ABA passed. Just within the last 60 or 90 days, lawyers who blog or engage in any public commentary may not reveal information relating to a representation, including information contained in a public record. So you had a week-long trial, it was all over the TV and newspaper, and you want to post it on Facebook. I won that case. What should you do before you make that post? Get your client. Who said that? That's right on. You, sir, what's your name? David. I can see this is right for you. Footloose. Kenny Loggins, Footloose. You got to remember your records because people will come up here and they'll try to steal your records. So you remember Footloose. Get your client's consent. And you may say, well, that's dumb. And some lawyers who commented on this opinion said, that's dumb. It's public record. It's all over the news. All I wanted to say was I was, happy to have won $1 million from my client. But the difference is when your lawyer is the one putting it out there. You may not have been happy that the newspaper had it on there. But you probably really aren't going to be happy if your lawyer is out there saying it. So I can see the rationale to that. So just be careful before you start posting stuff on social media. Another missed opportunity, in my opinion, from many lawyers that I work with, they don't ask for business. They don't pay attention to their story, their messaging. And they also don't pay attention to things on their website, like their attorney bio. Has anyone ever had a client come to you and in the first conference say, I want to know what law school you went to? And I'm serious. Has anyone? Because I'm not sure. Colleen, well, no, you're just being contrarian.
No, I am contrarian always, but I've had that happen. I've probably had that happen 24 times this calendar year. I get that all the time.
So they want to know what law school.
They want to know what law school I went to, and there are only 2 choices in Wisconsin. And when I tell them where I went, they're like, "Oh, I knew that." Okay.
Well, I think it is important information. How about class rank? Does anybody come in your office, any clients, and say, where do you rank in your graduating class, law school? And they're taking notes, And then they're going to go check up on it? Well, that never happened to me. It never did. I practiced 20, 30 years. I think it's important, but your online bio is not a resume, because really I don't think that's the story they're as interested in. They're more interested in who you are. How can you help me? And I'll tell you two attorneys I worked for. One was a litigation firm in Manhattan, big ticket firm, and they asked me to do a refresh of their website. And I went to the attorney bios, and one had a beautiful resume. It was a resume posted on there. Nobody's going to read that, in my opinion. At least they're not going to read it all the way through. I do think you want to have that information on there, and I can suggest ways to have it. But down at the bottom was a quote by Bishop Desmond Tutu, and it says, I'm going to paraphrase something like, don't raise your voice, make a better argument, something like that. I thought that was beautiful. And obviously that attorney put that there for some reason. It spoke to this attorney. When I asked her, she said, well, that's kind of my philosophy of litigation. Don't scream louder, make a better argument. I said, well, we need to pull that up, put it up top. I don't know. Maybe we should lead with where I graduated. No, you want to lead with that. You're not going to lose any client from this quote by Bishop Tutu. And it also tells a story. This is who I am. Another client I worked with had an associate who was a military veteran and had lost a limb and spent a month every summer at a camp for children who had disabilities, who had missing limbs and other disabilities. And way down in the attorney bio, something like he volunteers at this camp. It doesn't even say really what the camp is. So I went and looked what the camp was, and there were pictures on the camp's website of the counselors and some of the children. They teach them how to snowboard and climb mountains. And this particular attorney loved hiking and mountain climbing. And it had a picture of him with 2 or 3 campers. And they climbed a mountain, kids with missing limbs. I said, you got to put that up there. If you're going to mention it, at least, I don't think you want to sell that overtly, but it's who you are. And it says something about the firm that they gave this fairly new attorney, a month off every summer to go do this thing. It tells you something about that firm's values. This is important work. It makes you interesting. It makes you stand out. tells a story. And we all have interesting, I've never helped somebody climb a mountain, but I've got interesting things about me that I could put on a bio. Here's a bio I liked, and most of these I have not worked with. I don't want to give the impression I've worked, well, some of these I haven't. I have not worked with this gentleman, but I love his attorney bio. He's a criminal defense lawyer, and his name is Trusty. I mean, right away he's got an advantage, you know, I'm trusty. And then I love his tagline, Diane. His tagline, it says, hands-on counsel, gloves off litigation. Mr. Trusty. I love that. How can you not love that? Here's another bio I like, sort of taking a different approach. So you click on About Me page for Sia Baker Barnes, and you're brought right into her office. It looks like a place you'd love to hang out, right? There's even flowers there. What a wonderful place. Does anybody post on social media? Diane, you've already won a record. Anybody post on social media? I know some of you do. Yes?
We just have LinkedIn, and we're kind of looking at Facebook, but we haven't done anything with that.
Okay.
So we post our blogs both on the attorney's LinkedIn page and our firm's LinkedIn page.
And what's your name?
My name's Colleen.
Holly?
Colleen.
Colleen.
Yeah.
Colleen, you win, you win Guy Lombardo all lang syne for New Year's. Colleen, thank you for that. LinkedIn, we just saw that more lawyers are on LinkedIn than Facebook. Well, here are some metrics. Saturday and Sunday posting on Facebook, it is social media after all. So weekends, 12 to 1, gets almost a third higher engagement than posts on the weekdays. If you're going to post during the weekday, do it after lunch. That's going to get more clicks. Overnight is the worst. Nobody's going to read it, and it's going to be buried on the news feed, so they won't even see this wonderful post. And LinkedIn, Colleen, the best time is a little different. Midweek, 3 to 6 p.m. is the best engagement time for LinkedIn. Why do you think that's different than Facebook, the engagement results from LinkedIn?
Because Facebook is social and LinkedIn is more professional.
Exactly. So it's more likely professionals will be logging on. They won't feel guilty about looking at their LinkedIn page, right? Facebook, maybe. Yeah. Here's back to my friend Gary Poole. Here's his Facebook page. Remember, we're not going to talk about our verdicts and settlements unless the client has given us consent. So what do you talk about on Facebook? Here's what Gary does. Gary's a motorcycle lawyer. He joins motorcycle groups. And he goes to these motorcycle events. They're called rallies. So he goes to bike rallies all the time. He sets up a little booth. He gives out towels, biker towels, better than a refrigerator magnet, biker towels that have his name on it. And he goes to meetings, and he sets up a little table for these chapters, these clubs, these biker clubs, sets up a table in the back, and he says, I'll review your insurance policy absolutely free. And he says they all line up, because of course they're interested. Driving a motorcycle is risky. And he'll say, you might want to consider increasing your property damage, or he'll explain what underinsured motorist coverage means. And he says, I always get callbacks from and he doesn't charge, of course. He looks over their policies. He may define a term. What does this mean in this policy? Always gets calls back from that. When he posts on social media, he'll say something like, had a great time at the Myrtle Beach rally. And here's a picture of me and the chapter president with a wonderful beard. And he gets tons of clicks and shares. People are sharing it. And why wouldn't they? Because that's Uncle Ed with the beard there. And so they're all going to want to see. They don't care about Gary so much as they care about the people he put in there, because he's telling their story as much as his story. And the final part of how to differentiate is to choose the right clients. So tell a good story. Pay attention to your messaging online. Choose the right clients. Very, very important. Here are 10 signs of clients you might want to turn away when they come to your office. They don't pay you, or they want to dicker about your fee from the jump, You say, here's what I charge. Well, how about, no, this is not a bidding war here. They've been fired by their lawyers. They order pizza while in your waiting room. That happened to me once. And it probably was an indicator of how long I'd left my poor client there waiting. You know, they were starving. So it probably tells a story about me. But what is a more serious point about a client who would do something like that? What is maybe a more serious point? That's sort of a vague question, but let's try some. Yes?
No boundaries.
It's Gretchen, right?
Yes, it is.
We met before. Exactly. No boundaries. I think you will always be well served. You want your clients to know you, like you, and trust you. Don't get me wrong. But you will be well served by keeping a very clear and unbreachable boundary between your personal and professional lives. Because some clients, if you crack that door open a little bit, they'll come barging in. Next thing you know, they're sleeping on your couch, you know, and it's just not good. They sort of take over. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. Maybe they're needy, but yeah, you don't want people to, you want to have clear boundaries. I'm the lawyer, you're the client. Let's keep it professional. Other warning signs, the story keeps changing. They say they found you on Craigslist, and you don't even advertise on Craigslist. That's even worse. They say their case is a slam dunk. I'm sure Wisconsin Lawyers Mutual, I'm sure you talk about all of these things. Clients who come in and say, oh, anybody can win this case. And you're so lucky I'm bringing it to you, because I could win it myself, you know. Yeah, we might want to watch out about that. They're rude to your staff. The late, great Anthony Bourdain, one of my heroes, he was famous for evicting diners from his restaurants. Didn't matter if it was the best paying diner in the restaurant, if they were rude to his wait staff. He would come out from the back room and say, box your food up, you're out of here. What message do you think that sends to his staff, his wait staff? I want to work here. I'm going to do a good job. And I'm not going to put up with any garbage from our customers. Or if their case is outside your comfort zone, stay in your lane. You all know that. You've taken cases and you think, why did I do that? I thought I could learn bankruptcy law, but nah, in over my head. So refer those cases, associate a lawyer, or just say no to them. And you just have a bad feeling from the start. I'm sure you've all had that experience. Maybe it was a good case. You know, there's a fee there. But something about it. Maybe we're not clicking here. I'm not saying turn that case down, but just be aware. Just be aware that there's some warning signals here. Conversely, how can you wow them? Get to know them. Gary Poole joins their clubs, goes to their rallies. Visit them at their work if they want you to. You'll get a better sense of who they are, what their small business is like if you're actually there and look, oh, I see. You might pick up new business. Hey, have you ever thought about this? Or return their phone calls. Back when I started, I remember I went to a seminar, 1981. That's when I started. And they said, return your client phone calls within 48 hours. And I thought, man, that's quick. Back then, that was quick. Now, if you return within 48 hours, you'll get sued. They'll report you to Wisconsin Lawyers Mutual, you know. 48 minutes, 48 seconds. Do some work for free. We all know that. You don't have to bill for everything. Gary Poole gives hours and hours of his time analyzing and explaining insurance policies to prospective clients. He doesn't bill them for that. It pays off royally in a week or a month or a year later. Do a great job. That's the best way you can wow them. Also listen to them. The Mr. H story again. A mistake I made too often in my practice is I didn't listen to my clients enough. Because I knew I'd heard the story before. I knew what needed to be done. So let's just cut right. Okay, here's what you need. Here's what you need to do. You need to do blah, 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 blah. You want to listen to them. This is one of my favorite TED Talks, Ernesto Zeroli. It's one of the most popular TED Talks ever. He was a Peace Corps volunteer who talks about going to Zambia as an agricultural volunteer. And he said, we arrived in Zambia and said, you're so lucky we're here because we're going to save you. We're going to teach you modern agricultural methods and you'll all have food and aren't you glad we're here? And so they spent months tilling and planting and these beautiful lush crops. Tomatoes, he said, the size of watermelons grew. And the minute the crop ripened, hundreds of hippos came rushing out from the rivers and the lakes, trampled the gardens, ate all the vegetables. And Zaroli said he turned to his Zambian hosts, the residents, the people who lived there, and said, "Why didn't you tell us about the hippos?" And they said, "You never asked. You were so busy solving our problem. You had it all figured out." So listen to your client. Another tip is to practice empathy. Put yourself in their shoes. People will forget what you said and forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Dr. Maya Angelou, one of my heroes, had the pleasure of meeting her a couple of times. She was a professor for many years at a college. Does anyone know what university?
Wake Forest.
You, sir. What's your name?
Dan Adams.
Dan Adams. That's not a good one for you. It was sad songs. Elton John. It's a good song. Oh, Smile by Dean Martin. Yeah, smile when your heart is breaking. People will forget what you said and forget what you did. A quick story that illustrates how I learned that lesson. I used to give, when I was at Lawyers Mutual, I used to give seminars. I would travel around North Carolina and give programs. And I remember, and often much smaller than this. Sometimes it was just a handful of lawyers, which was great. And I remember I gave one program, and the attorney in the front row, I started like 30 seconds, he whips out a newspaper, and kind of made a big show, and he was just like 3 feet from me. And it just threw me off. It threw me off my game. And I didn't know, should I say? I had a laser pointer. Should I, try to, and I was just off my game. And everybody started leaning in to read his paper, and no one was listening to me. After I left the seminar, I parked outside. This was outside of Asheville in the mountains after snow melt. And I remember my car, and I had this big van. I drove this van, and it was sort of stuck in the mud. My van was stuck. Guess who was the first lawyer who came over and said, "We'll push you right out of here, get you on the road." It was the newspaper lawyer. He said, called a few of his buddies, come on, let's get him out of here. And he said, "Hey, by the way, you did a great job in the program." I loved him. All of a sudden, he's great. Wonderful. Guy I was wanting to shoot with my laser. I wouldn't recognize this gentleman, this is a true story, if he walked in this room. But I remember how he made me feel during the seminar. He made me feel disrespected. He made me angry. How rude. And I remember how he made me feel when he was the first one to jump behind my van. "You are awesome, man. You're my best friend." People will forget what you said, forget what you did, but they'll remember how you made me feel. My lawyer respected me. My lawyer listened to me. My lawyer made me feel like I was important. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with them or even like them, according to the rules of professional conduct, to listen and to empathize. So to conclude, consider what your value proposition is. What do you offer that's cheaper, different, or better? Here's a firm in North Carolina, the Forrest firm. He makes very clear what his value proposition is. He worked for big law firms in Atlanta and Raleigh. In 2011, he left those big firms to open a solo business practice. First, he was by himself working in a spare bedroom, but he said, and I know James, and he said, "I wanted to do 3 things. I wanted to have strong messaging," and he does. He has a beautiful website. It's blue, see? It's solemn and tranquil, and he really pays attention to the message. He has a robust online presence. He has one of the best email newsletter I've ever seen. He makes business law fun, engaging to read. You get those most email letters, what do? I trash them, and I unsubscribe, but I like his. He makes them lively, makes them fun. He gives away stuff for free in that letter. And he also got certified as a B corporation. Has anybody heard of a certified B Corp? It's not a legal designation like LLC. It's a designation given by the nonprofit B Lab for businesses, not just law firms, who commit to social, economic, and community empowerment. And you have to meet certain standards, and they come in and they rate you, and then you can call yourself a B corporation. One way he does that is by asking, he has transparent pricing. He tells clients, how would you like, do you want to pay flat fees? Most clients like to know what this is going to cost. So he's very transparent with pricing. Another way is he gives a portion of every fee that he gets from a client to a charity or nonprofit that they designate. He says, where would you like to give me? You tell me. I'm going to cut him a check. So they're paying him, and then he's passing it on to the community, empowerment. What story does that tell the client? That makes them feel probably a little better when they pay him, right? Because it's going to their church or their favorite charity. So he's grown from one lawyer in 2011 to he now has 7 physical offices across the state and 45 lawyers in 7 years. 7 years. And I will finally leave you with a guaranteed recipe to a successful law life. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to know that even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. Every one of you in this room has the opportunity when you leave here today, whether you go back to your office or go back to your home, you have the opportunity to make at least one life breathe a little bit easier with a kind word, maybe by listening, maybe something you do. And what a wonderful privilege is that, right? So I will conclude by saying thank you and take care of your clients, take care of each other, take care of the profession. The profession needs all of you, and mostly take care of yourself. And I will see you back in 2038.
Thank you, Jay. We'll take a 15-minute break. We'll reconvene at 10:30. For those of you in the room who won records, please come up and claim them. Those of you on the web, come back at 10:30, and we'll commence with the panel discussion. Thanks. All right, we're back. Second half of the program. We have our panel in place, and we will get started. I want to introduce the panel. First, to my immediate right is Sarah Mills. Sarah is shareholder with the Milwaukee firm of Crivello Carlson. She focuses on complex commercial and personal civil defense, civil rights, and appeals. Sarah represents individuals, professionals, corporations, product manufacturers, employers, school districts, municipalities, and insurers in matters involving allegations of infringement of civil rights, legal and professional malpractice, commercial interests, personal injury, premises liability, insurance coverage, construction defects, and bad faith. Sarah, welcome. Eric Andrews is an associate with the law firm of McCoy, Levitt, Lasky in Waukesha. Prior to joining the firm, Attorney Andrews practiced at a Milwaukee area insurance defense firm where he generally litigated personal injury, property damage, premises liability, construction, civil rights, and municipal law matters. Attorney Andrews is a 2011 graduate of Marquette University Law School. While at Marquette Law, he served as a paralegal and law clerk for the Milwaukee Area Insurance Defense Firm and was a member of Marquette Law's Black Law Student Association. Eric, welcome as well. And we know Jay and Matt Beyer, to Eric's immediate right, is a claims attorney with us here at Wisconsin Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company. Matt provides professional claims service for our insured lawyers. He works to investigate, evaluate, and resolve claims as efficiently as possible. As what else would he do, right? Matt is, prior to joining us at WILMIC in 2016, Matt was a civil litigation attorney in Madison. He has experience before state and federal courts, as well as Wisconsin administrative agencies. Matt has broad experience in diverse areas of law. That would include personal injury, employment law, contract law, business law, commercial law, and debtor-creditor law. Matt is a 1996 graduate of South Dakota State University, where he also played football, and he got a degree there in political science. He then graduated from UW Law School in 2000. So thanks all of you for being on the panel. And once again, I would encourage all of you, as we talk and the panelists give you their insights and we hit various issues and topics, if something comes to mind, whether it's a comment or a question, please jump in. We would be happy to entertain that. We value your insights and knowledge just as much as the panelists. I don't know, Jay, we're probably still giving out records, huh? Okay. All right. We still have some unclaimed here, by the way, so make sure you get those. All right.
I apologize to the other panelists. This is unfair that I brought records. I mean,
you know, Jay, you were talking just near, I think kind of near the end of your presentation about client communication and client selection, I guess, Eric, I'll start with you. You had mentioned in your outline, clients often want to talk to their attorney sometimes almost every day. I certainly had some divorce clients who were like that. I guess, can attorneys realistically spend every day talking to a client? Jay, you mentioned in 1981 the idea that if you return a phone call within 48 hours, that was considered good. As we know, I guess the perception of good client service has changed dramatically, particularly with the internet. Eric, what do you run into? Do you find that you need to answer email right away? What happens in your practice?
Generally, I do respond as quickly as possible. Although I primarily practice in insurance defense, I do have some plaintiff cases that I do as well. And in my experience, dealing with the plaintiffs is a lot more difficult than insurance clients. Plaintiffs, like I kind of outlined in my materials, they will talk to you every day if they can, and the most important, thing that I do when dealing with plaintiffs that I represent is setting those boundaries up front to say, look, I'm going to represent you. I know your needs. You've discussed those with me, but you have to let me do my work. And as things proceed and important things, occur in a case, I'll definitely consult with the client before making decisions and things of that nature. But you have to set those boundaries in the beginning, And then on the insurance defense side, when you get an email from an insurance defense client, an insurer, or an insured, I do try to respond within a day or two, and then as far as communications with them, besides that, I usually communicate with them maybe on a monthly basis. I'll do a status report to them, just to make sure they're updated to any developments that have occurred in the case, and just try to communicate with them as effectively and as practically as you can. You can't respond 2 hours after an email, but as soon as possible, is a good practice.
And it's how you make them feel, remember? Not what
How
you
you
do
make
or
them
say.
feel.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have communication strategies with your clients?
I think I'm probably a little bit like Jay's children, who he said hate the phone and will not pick up the phone. And I'm bad about returning phone calls, but I'm very good about responding to emails. And I think it's oftentimes because you can find a few minutes in your day as you're moving from thing to thing, and it's almost more convenient time-wise to address someone's question rather than being interrupted, taking the phone call, losing your train of thought. So a lot of times what I do is, if I realize that a new case is coming in and the client is responsive via email, I tell them straight off the bat, feel free to call me anytime, but the best way to contact me is by email, because I always check my email multiple times a day, and it works really well that way, because then I can respond to them much, much faster than getting around to listening to the voicemail, responding, finding the time to sit down and do that.
I guess one of the challenges too would be trying to figure out the method of communication clients prefer, right? They're different. Some like the phone, some like email. You guys find that to be the case?
Yeah, I ask them usually up front, how do you prefer to communicate? Do you have an email address that you check regularly? Do you not want to be bothered during the workday? And so even just that implies some boundaries and sort of set some expectations.
Okay. Katya.
Yeah, I have a question about this, because in my mind, if it's a more important issue that I want to communicate with you, I would call you rather than email. So I would rank it in importance: a phone call, a text, and email. And so it's interesting that your ranking is different. So I guess that just highlights that conversation needs to happen up front. Because we actually, for risk management advice, we will tell lawyers, tell your client, if it's important, call me. If there can be time in my response, send an email. So we're doing it the opposite of, or differently than you are.
Sometimes I find that it actually helps to respond in email too, because then a client who isn't especially savvy with the litigation process, I almost add a little more detail, and it's like they can refer back to it as sort of, okay, I'm getting nervous, what do I expect? Wait, let me go back to that email. That's right, she said that the discovery period could be 6 months, and if I don't hear anything, it doesn't mean. So sometimes even if I do have the phone conversation with them, I follow up with an email so that they have their own sort of comfort zone and expectations that they can go back to and think, okay, everything's going fine. She said this is how it would go.
Gretchen.
I worry about cyberspace because I get hundreds of emails a day, and I'm not even in practice anymore. I'm at the law school. And many of those that are important go into clutter, and I don't see them unless I check clutter or junk. And so I would worry, do you tell your clients if you have not heard from me within 24 hours of sending an email, send it again? Or how do you deal with the missing, your client who sent you an email last week and you never saw it?
I've never had it as a problem, but I work at a firm with an IT department that has set up specific parameters for our inbox where it's pretty good. We know things aren't going to get shuffled off into the netherworld of nothingness. So it's not ever happened to me.
I would be cautious about that.
And if it's an email that I need to have a response from my client based on that email, then I'll follow up if I haven't heard from the client, maybe in like a couple of days or so. If it's something that's urgent and I need them to get back in touch with me, if they haven't, then I'll make sure I reach out to them just to make sure that we're on the same page with everything. So.
Tom,
Yes, Jay.
I want to be clear that I hope I wasn't heard to say it's not important to take your client's calls or to talk on the phone. I totally agree with Katya. I was talking more about marketing, that some clients, their initial contact, they may be more comfortable just sending you a text or an email. We were talking during the break, text, rather than picking up the phone and a cold call to you. But certainly returning calls, and that personal touch is much safer and better than an impersonal email. And I worked with one firm that Sarah sort of referred to this, that does and they put it in writing, and preferred communication protocol with new clients. How would you like me to contact you? What is the best method? What time of day? And then put it in writing and you review it periodically. Wait, here's how we agreed. And
For some of you who are solos, do you feel at all at a disadvantage because you don't have a big IT staff, or do you feel like, Colleen, you don't feel that way? No. And I am not tech savvy Hang on. At all. Okay.
Excuse me. I am not tech savvy at all, but I do not feel at a disadvantage because, I'm the person who answers the phone. I'm the person who reads the emails and gets the texts, and I'm there. And my clients know that I'm the one who answers the phone and the emails, and they know they're reaching me, and I am getting back to them as quickly as humanly possible.
Just one word of caution on the as quickly as humanly possible. I think it's important as the lawyer in the relationship, the lawyer-client relationship, to teach the client how to communicate with you. And so, circling back to Eric's point, setting boundaries immediately at the outset, and to Jay's point, put it in writing. At least we have a roadmap of how to communicate is a great idea. But as soon as you respond to that text that your client sent to you at midnight, that becomes the expectation. And so maybe it's okay to wait until the next morning. Obviously, emergencies don't allow for that, but I think it's also important that your client understands that you're not at their beck and call every single minute of the day.
Katya and I just went through this the other day. I responded to an email. I shot out my response, and I realized a few minutes later that I might not have been completely clear about that, and so I sent out a follow-up email clarifying what I was saying, and then Katya was on the group email and sent me back an email saying, "Thanks for clarifying that. I'm glad you did that." And we were talking about this old adage that email is great, technology is great, but it means that our mistakes can get sent out by the speed of light, right? So the speed is fantastic, but it means your mistakes also can fly out just as fast. So I just thought I'd throw that out. Diane, and then we have a couple others. Go ahead, Diane.
Speaking to your earlier question about whether or not as a solo practitioner without an IT firm,
Yes.
Do you feel at a disadvantage? One of the things I think is so important is to have your IT person. So I have an IT person I've worked with for years, and when I have a problem, I call him, and I pay him always on time, and I would not try to do this alone. So I have sort of this stable of people who are there to help me, whether it's with my website or my IT issues, and you build up that kind of loyalty in a relationship. So it's not like I'm really going it alone. I do have those folks.
Yeah, okay. Yes, go ahead, then we'll get you. Go ahead.
I'm wondering if you guys can comment on text messaging. I'm a solo. I do mostly criminal law. 90% of my clients are 50 years old or younger, mostly, millennial or younger. Their preferred means of communication is text message. Certainly if a client says, asks an open-ended question of, am I going to prison? That's something I respond back with, hey, this is a phone call type thing. But in a lot of more ministerial type things, text message is just the way to go. And even kind of intermediary conversations, they just like the text format. And I'm wondering if that is not the best practice.
I personally don't like to text clients ever, because for the main reason that it's very difficult to keep track of those conversations. So if I'm taking a phone call, I'm writing hand notes that summarize what happened, and I'm scanning it into my file. So I have a record of the conversation. I can refer back to it in a couple months when I've forgotten. Emails, they all get uploaded, so I have something to go back to and remember. What did we discuss? What did we say? With text messages, it's a much different process. There are a lot of other steps to get that text message up into the file and to think, oh gosh, what did we talk about? Wait, let me pull that up. I got to go skim through all of this back. To me, my concern would be how you are retaining the information and making sure that, once you're done with the representation, all of those texts end up in the file. There's a record of it. So I just personally don't, unless it's like, texting them about the location of mediation or something, I just say, let's email. It's a lot easier to have it, and it's a lot easier for me to type. So.
I think that's an important point, Sarah, especially for those who don't have a robust IT department. Texts are often cumbersome to reduce to a printout or even saving. If you don't have your mobile device or whatever you use to text, it's difficult to have an accurate record of it later. Plus, text communication is never complete. It's meant to be abbreviated. And so, complete thoughts from lawyers when they are important can't be communicated that way. So I think your question was, is it the best practice? I think the short answer is no. But does your client expect it? I think the best text you can write is call me on that, or let's discuss further in a meeting, or I'll follow up with an email, and then do that. Because I think if you go too far down the texting road, you're too far into the world of incomplete and sometimes inaccurate communication.
We have a comment from a web viewer, and she says a quick tip. This is to my comment about potential mistakes going out at the speed of light. You can place a hold on your email so you can push it out when you want. She says, I have a 15-minute delay for those oops moments. So a comment from the, well put. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a couple observations on this and then some questions. First of all, this seems to be a huge generational issue because, I started practicing law the days before computers, and your communication was either in person or on the phone, those two ways. I also worked for a large multinational insurance company, and when emails started coming out, there was a question about when do you use this and when do you actually talk to somebody. And the things I'm hearing from you two guys in particular strike me as things that, hey, some of this stuff should be written and communicating early as to a plan of attack, but then if you're emailing back and forth later on, you don't have the opportunity to ask questions and have them answered in real time and actually understand, as Jay was saying earlier, what the concerns of your client are. I mean, what are they really concerned about? And if you're not interacting in real time, you're not ever getting that. And I think that's a real problem, and how you deal with that with younger lawyers in your firm, I'm not exactly sure about, but it is a problem. I mean, I practiced law in another state where they actively discouraged asking questions in seminars like this or other people talking. In Wisconsin, we require, to get credit, that you be able to ask questions and have them answered. There's a reason for that. So I think email and texting and phoning and doing things in person, those are real questions. And as somebody else earlier said, if it's important, I think that you need to talk to somebody so you understand where they're coming from and they understand where you're coming from. So anyway, I'm curious and again, for the personal touch, as Jay was discussing, how do you have a personal touch in a text or an email? I don't know how you do that. So anyway, that's enough for now.
Well, I should clarify that the way that I communicate with the client as the case is going forward depends, it's case by case, and it's feeling out what they feel comfortable with. But I always, the minute the case lands on my desk, have an in-person meeting with the client right off the bat. And that's where, like you say, you get kind of a feel for the person. There's all the nonverbal cues that Jay had referenced. When things are communicated, their body language, you can get a much better sense of, are they defensive? Is this going to be a needy client? And so it's usually at least an hour, no matter what the kind of case is. It can be, millions and millions of dollars or just a rear-end car accident that's, soft tissue injuries. Doesn't matter what it is. And I think that they really appreciate, even if they think it's kind of inconvenient to take the time off work or to meet with me, it always ends well. And that's where we establish, well, how do you prefer to discuss things? Do you want things by email? And I even ask them a lot of times, like, do you even want copies of things? I've got the file, it's being built up for you, but some clients, they get, the legalese documents, and they just get more and more nervous. Like, I don't want to see all this stuff. I don't know what it means. It's making me think that things are going south. So at that first meeting, I get to kind of feel them out and then move on with whatever sort of plan of communication we decide is best.
And generally, in my experience, I always differentiate between the plaintiffs and insurance defense work that I do. Insurance defense work, I have a similar approach to Sarah's, where we meet with the insured right away and set up any boundaries that we need to have with them as far as our communications. The insurers aren't as picky. As long as you keep them updated on things that are going on in the case and important developments such as settlement discussions, depositions, whether you need to retain an expert or something like that, then they're satisfied as long as you communicate that to them effectively. On the plaintiff side, for instance, I have a plaintiff case right now where a guy was rear-ended and he calls me with questions that I think that he should already know the answer to, but when he calls me, I always answer because I understand that this is his first time being involved in that type of incident. So normally I would set that boundary up front to say, look, I can only talk to you on certain occasions. I have other files and things like that. You're important, but everyone is important. But with this guy, I have to go out of my way to make sure that I call him back when he leaves me a voicemail, just to make sure that not only he's satisfied, but he knows what's going on at the case, because I don't want him to feel like I'm not communicating with him effectively enough. So.
The point about generational is a good one. My two sons are in their 30s. They text me all the time, but when I call their cell phone, they never answer. They just love texting, not so much talking. So I don't know. I guess clients are the same, right? They just have different preferences. Yes, sir.
I'm old. I'd like to vent. This is just a comment.
Okay.
But it might be helpful to the younger lawyers. I'm noticing, especially with younger lawyers, not picking up the phone and speaking, but using when you're speaking on the phone, speakerphone. I'm sorry, speakerphone. Yeah, I really strongly recommend that you ask permission to use the speakerphone before you're talking. A lot of people are insulted by that. I mean, just think of a client. I do a lot of business work, experienced, successful business person, and you're so important that you can't even pick up the goddamn phone, So use the speakerphone. I mean, you ask permission to use it. I don't know if that's just a quirk of mine. That's the way I was taught. My father was a lawyer, and I've trained younger lawyers, and I think it's being discourteous to automatically always assume that you speak on a speakerphone before you ask permission. End of speech.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Matt, the whole communications umbrella generally, I think our claim statistics are something like at least a third of our claims can be tied back to a communications issue, if I'm not mistaken. So you guys see that in claims fairly regularly, am I right?
Yeah, well, yes, is the short answer. And, I think communication really is the reason why, claims can be traced back to, some sort of fault in communication, is because that's the heart of your relationship. And so, remember, this is an attorney, and I have to come back to the text, I'm sorry, but, we're talking about attorney-client relationships. We're not talking about your best friend. There is a time to have, to attend a motorcycle rally and, communicate informally. But at the end of the day, you are a professional. And so you need to recognize and you need to be able to draw lines and understand when they are crossed or encroached, so that if something does need to be reduced to writing, it is. I often talk about what are called, they used to be called CYA letters. I don't like that phrase or that term, but I prefer IAY letters. I advised you. That was, I think that's important because no matter how you advise your client, whether it's in a phone call, in an email, text, or something, if it needs to be clarified and you need to have an accurate record of it, reduce it to a letter and understand that you're the lawyer and you're the one that has to make that call. Because oftentimes the dispute, when it lands on Brian's and my desk, it's he said this, no, she said that, and it becomes that sort of battle. Well, who cares? What did you write down, and what is in the letter is a much more complete and much more accurate idea or expression of what exactly was communicated. So yes, the claims do trace back to communication. I think that's there are things that you can do to avoid those kinds of claims, but the heart of a lot of the claims that come across are due to communication or bad communication.
You mentioned documentation. That's a big one too, right? Put it in writing, yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's especially important. Jay talked earlier about sort of the how this practice of law is evolving, and it's becoming one where we have limited scope representation ideas and agreements. I think if you, let me just give you an example. I had an attorney contact me about a real estate deal. And the client walked into his office and, he said, look, I only want you to work on this part and this part. I'll handle everything else. And so, the lawyer was smart, and he documented a limited scope agreement where he clearly identified exactly what he was going to work on and what he wasn't going to work on. And inevitably, the client came back and said, well, now I need help with this. And the lawyer said, well, that's outside of our agreement, but let's, reduce this to writing again. And so three separate occasions and on three separate parts of the transaction that happened to him, and he was smart enough to document it each time. And in doing so, when all the wheels came off at the very end and they tried to close on the real estate transaction, it didn't work. He had a very solid papered file to fall back on to thwart any effort toward a claim. So it is very important to document, of course. And I think, Jay also talked about, when you pick a client or when the client picks you and you go through the evaluation, if you have a client who may change their story or shift on you, think about James Comey. I don't think it was any particular grand insight to realize that the person that he was talking to might change his story. And so how did he, sort of head that off at the pass? He went back to his office and he immediately wrote a memo about it. It doesn't have to be a letter to the client, but it should definitely be a contemporaneous recollection of what exactly was said.
And I completely second that, especially, it sounds like there are a lot of solo practitioners here, but if you have a practice where you often have multiple attorneys on a file, it can be incredibly frustrating if one of them is doing a lot of phone communication, but then in no way documenting what was said, what was agreed upon, and then you turn around, pick up the file, and you look like an idiot, basically, because you have no way to know what was discussed if that person doesn't document it. And so that's another reason that anytime I talk on the phone, even if it's a 2-second conversation, I write down, the name, the phone number, and the time they called, and make sure that I put it in the file, even if it was just, oh, hey, I just wanted to say hi. Because then it makes everybody end up on the same page. And there's a clear record that, nope, this phone call happened at this time. They can't come back months later and say, well, they never talked to me. I never had a chance to talk to them.
Tom, I would also, this is a good time to remind everyone, you're not alone out there, even if you're practicing solo. A lot of these are tough issues, and they're often specific to the circumstances, but you've got Wisconsin Lawyers Mutual, and they have a wealth of information, and I'll bet Matt would be happy, or somebody there would be happy to talk you through. If you have a question about tech, any of these things we're talking about. So if you're insured with them, and I'm guessing most of you are, you all should be, you've got a resource right there. So you don't have to sort through these thorny issues on your own necessarily.
We'll talk to you even if you're not insured. Just not as long.
Scott, you had a question.
So wouldn't if you have a brief call, wouldn't your billing be your documentation of that? I mean, if it's something material, you might have a memo, but if someone calls you and says, I'm just calling to tell you I'm going to be at my deposition 20 minutes early, and you give them instructions, wouldn't your billing, I mean, it's not a material conversation, it's going to be a short conversation, it permeates into doing what you suggested, giving something free. You may not bill for it, you might show it as a no charge, but wouldn't that be your best place, so that if somebody said you didn't talk to me, because that's how you communicate with your client every month, to send them a bill and it says we talked on this date, we talked on this date, we talked on this date, and it may not have been material, like you talked about legal issues, but wouldn't that be your best way of documenting your file as to the communication, even if it wasn't material?
Would your bill be detailed enough to accurately describe the conversation? I guess
There are all sorts of statistics that talk about how much time we don't actually recover and record. It just, a 30-second phone call doesn't always end up as on a bill. It's, just sort of forgotten about. And so for me personally, I try not to rely on just the bill for those kinds of things. And because somebody else coming into the file and looking at it might have no idea to look at the bill to see what the phone conversations might have been. But I know that a lot of times little calls like that just don't end up on a bill. And so for me personally, I wouldn't trust it.
I think billing is definitely one of the ways that you communicate with your client, and you ought to, review each bill before it goes out, of course. But if you're doing your billing right, yeah, that's, the equivalent of a contemporaneous note to what might have been discussed. But I also don't know how much detail you can put in a bill. Like Sarah said, is it actually a complete recollection of what was said, or are your notes better? In other words, it may show up on the bill as telephone conference with you, the client, and it lasted, a tenth of an hour. But your notes obviously would say, conference with you about, okay? Your bill might include that, but I think, the contemporaneous note and or the follow-up letter are probably more thorough ways. Not to say that billing isn't important and it isn't an effective tool to communicate. It certainly is.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question about the preservation of documentation, where we've crossed from written communication when I started practice to now, where email is probably 80% of our communication, much of it very critical to cases. How do people actually preserve that form of communication? Our firm has a system, but I've talked to lawyers who have thousands of emails sitting in their inbox or in their sent items, and that's the extent of it. I'd be interested in a comment from the panel about that.
Our firm practices a procedure where if we have an email communication with a client or anything related to a file, I always copy my assistant on the email, and my assistant profiles every email that I get, whether I'm receiving an email from someone. If I receive an email from someone, I forward that on to my assistant to save. If I'm responding back to that email, I copy my assistant on that response. So every communication that I have with that client regarding that file is documented in we have a system called World Docs. So every law firm has different forms of saving those documents and things like that. But every communication I have by email is saved into that World Docs file. So.
Yeah, file storage, file management, right? Document management, that's a huge thing. Matt, you've been doing a lot of this kind of stuff. So many different ways to do it, so many different questions that we get from lawyers about that.
Yeah, I don't think it takes too much time to figure out an electronic storage system and solution. I think there are so many software products. WorldDocs is one of them. We use one called Laserfiche. There are too many ways now for a lawyer not to take reasonable precautions on storing electronic communications. I think, I don't think I know that we now have rules that require lawyers to take reasonable measures, reasonable technological measures to store information, whether it's emails. Text messages, again, I think it's a little bit cumbersome. I don't know, people ask me all the time, how do I convert these things into something that can be stored electronically on my computer so I don't have to keep them on my phone? I have no idea. But that's not my bailiwick, and that's why it's important to have somebody in IT who knows what the heck they're doing to figure that out. So what are people doing? I think there are so many of these software programs out there that there are many to choose from. I wouldn't recommend one other than the one that I use, but again, I think that a couple of phone calls to friends, colleagues, whatever, will help you get down the right path toward what exactly you need to do to be able to keep those things. We have many paperless offices, I think, where paper is just the enemy. So many things are now easily accessed on your personal computers that you need to make sure you have a good storage information in place.
A lot of times the questions we get are, what do I do with all those boxes and boxes of files that are in my basement, my office basement? We've had lawyers call us and describe 30 plus years of paper files down there, and what do I do with all those? That's a big one too.
Right, and is there a risk that you're going to, or is there going to be a need for that information 30 years down the road? I have no idea, but it certainly would be, those paper files would certainly be the best record of what occurred back then. We can't rely on our memories that long. I don't know, maybe you guys can chime in about private practice these days, how often you convert those kinds of paper, those voluminous paper files, how simple is it to scan them in and save them in PDF format? I just don't know.
I know at our firm, we used to, within the last 10 years, save paper files. Now we've gotten to the point where at the conclusion of a case, because most files are primarily paperless anyway, there isn't a whole lot of scanning to do. But anything that isn't electronically somehow in the file is scanned in. So there's one complete electronic record, and then the only thing that is saved for whatever number of years we've designated, I forget what it is off the top of my head, but is originals, original signature pages, discovery, stuff like that, original deposition transcripts, so that it's also a space saver. So you don't have these giant files, you really just got a disk or a flash drive.
Back to the client communication just for a moment. We have a comment from a web viewer. Closure letters are important, the viewer writes. For example, a will drafted and no response when you send the draft to the client. Again, no response. Send a closure letter that the client has not responded to you as you close the file. They write, Sally Anderson taught me this. It applies to all termination or limitation of representation matters. So that comment from the web. Client selection, communication, any questions, comments about that? I think we've talked about client selection probably enough. Have any of you turned away clients? You have? With no regrets? The regret usually is the opposite, right? You end up taking a client that you wish you had never taken. Okay. All right. Well, let's, I guess, Matt, I'm going to jump back to you for a second with regards to this. You want to talk about the risks of taking on clients or cases that you probably shouldn't have taken, whether it's the client or whether it's an area of practice that you may not be as familiar with as you should be? We call that dabbling, and that we run into claims with that as well.
Yeah, we sure do. So, and the rule here is the one that deals with competence. And, if you're dabbling in an area, most often we've seen it, and we've seen a fairly significant jump in claims in the bankruptcy and collections area. I think lawyers who see a matter, let's take collections for example, as something that is relatively simple, one that is easy to handle, and a lawyer, somebody didn't pay their bill, they owe money. It doesn't get much simpler than that. But it's important not to get in, too far into the alphabet soup of consumer protection statutes that exist out there, because they are so technical and there are so many different requirements, not just don't be a jerk, requirements, but also, specific language that you have to include in any communication with debtors, for example. So when we get into areas like that are hyper-technical, and a seemingly simple matter is one that can become complex really quickly and have some pretty stiff penalties on the back end, it's important to recognize what your limitations are. Early on in my career, Bob Pash said to me, a good lawyer knows what he knows, and a great lawyer knows what he doesn't know. So recognize when you're in an area that you shouldn't be in, and then have a decent referral source for that kind of work. I don't have it right in front of me, but it's one of my favorite statistics. Most of the claims, something like 40% of the claims that come in are attorneys who are in a practice area in which they practice 5% or less. So I think that's a pretty common sense application of what trouble dabbling can get you into.
And to follow up on that, I use that kind of like as a marketing approach as well, because I get calls from clients, maybe off of a website or maybe just word of mouth, saying, well, hey, can you help me out with this issue? I don't practice family law, so if I have a family law case, I'll hand that off to someone and say, look, if you get any cases, that you might be able to throw my way, that's fine. But I don't even touch those cases if I don't know how to do them. I don't practice family law, criminal law, things of that nature. So, but I do use that as a kind of quid pro, kind of to get cases from someone else that may not practice in an area that I do. So.
And I think it's really important for younger attorneys or even solos where can be immense pressure to bring in business, and you think, well, someone's standing here and they want to hire me. Somebody upstairs is looking down on me, waiting to see how much revenue I'm bringing in. And this is a client, this is a warm body. I got to get him in the door. But you do kind of have to step back and objectively look at it and think, okay, but long term, is this case going to go south? Do I have, like Jay's presentation said, just go with your gut? Do you have that bad feeling? And if this is an area of law that you aren't familiar with and you already kind of have that bad feeling, 99% of the time you're right about that case is one you should pass.
It's on page 2 of my outline, the statistics. Approximately 44% of all claims reported involve areas of practice in which lawyers devote less than 10% of their total practice in. And then less than 3% of all claims involve areas of practice in which lawyers devote 80 to 90% of their total practice. So know your strengths and know what you're good at and know when you need help.
Gretchen.
I just want to put a plug in for a couple of things. One is, when my students graduate from law school, they're going to be dabbling no matter what they're doing because they haven't done it yet. And so to say that they shouldn't be taking cases that they're not sure they can handle, I think that's unfair to our new lawyers. I think we would be better served to help them get mentors and to help them increase their skills rather than telling them that they're going to be sued if they try something they've never tried before. The second thing I want to add is it's a little bit arrogant for people in Madison and Milwaukee. I mean, no offense to you guys, but We have a whole state out there that is underserved by lawyers, and a lawyer way up north can't do just one area of law very easily. We have a whole state full of people who need lawyers, and we have a whole state full of poor people who maybe aren't dream clients. And to say that people shouldn't take clients who can't pay them or who may not be able to, or that lawyers should not help people who are in an area of law that they may not be completely familiar with, I think shows a certain amount of lawyer arrogance on our parts.
For fear of, I don't want to sound defensive. Your points are well taken, Gretchen. I guess we don't tell lawyers don't take cases that are not in your wheelhouse or your area of expertise. Just blindly don't take them. We caution them that can increase their risk for malpractice, and there are some good ways to approach those kinds of cases. One being, as you said, mentoring. Find a mentor or network with colleagues. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And I don't know if Matt, you want to expound on this a little bit, but I don't. If the message sounded like we're saying don't, you absolutely shouldn't do it. I think it's a little more nuanced than that. I think the mentoring and the collegiality, the networking, the getting advice from more experienced lawyers, or in some cases being able to refer them if you absolutely have to, those are all part of the mix, I think, Gretchen, and I think you would probably agree with that. Yes. Matt, did you want to?
No, just to echo your points, Tom, and I understood, and no one is here trying to sound arrogant, and I would push back on that a little bit, and simply say that I think really the lesson here is to recognize when you don't know something, and when you don't, find somebody who does, and if they can help you, and you can you can take a sort of cooperative approach to it. I think that's best. But I think our job is to identify where the risks are. And we have to look at the numbers. And if the numbers tell us that people who are dabbling in an area that they shouldn't be in, and that gives rise to the most claims, then we need to make sure that lawyers are aware of that. And certainly not to say, no, don't do it. Nobody likes to hear no. But really to find different solutions to be able to solve that problem.
And to follow up on that point, as being one of the only members of my family to actually have a college degree, much less a law degree, when I graduated from law school, I got calls from family members all the time. Hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And as a new lawyer, I wanted to help them, but I knew that I couldn't. So fortunately, I was in a firm where a number of people practice a number of different areas. So for example, I had a cousin who wanted to divorce his wife. I know nothing about divorce. I know everything about, not everything, but I know enough about insurance defense and plaintiff cases and things of that nature, but nothing about divorce. So I went downstairs to someone that I knew about that type of work, and I said, hey, can you help them out? And they were able to help them out. So my point is that I can't help everyone out, no matter, and I understand that your points are well taken, but I always try to find someone that can help them out, even if I have to point them to the Legal Aid Society or Marquette Volunteer Law Clinic or something like that. So, and I can't speak to the rural parts of the state, but I do serve on the Wisconsin Trust Account Foundation on that board as well. And I do know that we have partners all throughout the state who do domestic violence abuse work and low-income work in those rural communities as well. The volunteer, they do it for people who are below the poverty level. So
I have to kind of smile at Eric when he says, well, I was fortunate to work at a firm where XYZ, because we used to work together, and then he left us. But I had a very similar experience right out of law school, being at a firm where we did a lot of different stuff, and I got experience. I was dabbling, and I think it served me very, very well. I didn't come out and immediately go and do, asbestos products liability and only that. I didn't go and just do personal injury. I did whatever, people would always ask, what kind of law do you practice? And I'm like, well, whatever my boss tells me to do, that's what I practice. But over time, what kinds of cases I work on has slowly shifted to what I really enjoy. And I've gotten to a point where I can more narrowly focus my interests. But I still take cases that it might only be 5% of what I do, but I feel comfortable enough doing them because I had that dabbling period. But there are definitely still areas of law where this is something that needs more attention or more skill than I can give it. And like you mentioned, with family law, I get calls all the time and people wanting to hire me, and I explain to them, you're already in a financial position where you're gonna probably have a hard time paying me. Here's the phone number for the Marquette Legal Aid Clinic, in Milwaukee County. They are there at the courthouse every Wednesday. There's lots of programs in other counties, even rural ones. And so I try to kind of steer those people to pro se type situations, but with a safety net in programs that exist for them, because I know I'm not going to be serving their interests.
A comment from a web viewer, and this is a bit kind of echoes, Matt, what you said. A good attorney knows what they know, knows what they don't know, and knows where to find out the information they don't know. A comment from a web viewer. Elizabeth, go ahead.
I recently declined a request for representation. And like Matt just said, nobody likes to hear no because it didn't end there. After I said no, I received extremely angry communications from that person. And I'm interested in what, it was almost like, how could you possibly not take me? And I'm just interested in what risks you might see in that kind of scenario.
Well, I think we had a comment from the web about Sally Anderson teaching about, closing letters, even non-engagement letters. Very, very important. And at some point, you're a lawyer, you don't want to be a jerk, but at some point you do need to cut off communication, so that if it becomes, sort of an angry exchange, that's not benefiting anybody. I think a common reflex for lawyers is to refer that person out. You don't necessarily, if your favorite colleague, I like Eric, but I don't want to give him crappy work, So be careful about referrals. But I think that's also something that you can recognize as a tool of yours to be able to get that person some help that they need. Maybe there's another person that might be a better fit, in other words, but just be careful about that. I think, well, I'll just stop there, I think.
And I would add, my practice, I represented lawyers and doctors in disciplinary cases in the latter 10 years of my practice. It's not just a loss prevention tip. The rules of ethics require a baseline of competence, and the rules also list some ways that you can become competent. You don't have to be an expert. You can take a case you don't know about, and they suggest, the rules, the comments suggest certain ways: associating with someone, referring it out, calling Eric, a good lawyer who knows what they're doing. I represented lots of lawyers, and it was never a defense in a state bar complaint to say, well, I really wanted to help this client, but I didn't know what I was doing. That was never a defense. So I think there are ways to have it both ways, to do good and to protect yourself.
And anecdotally, I do legal malpractice defense as well, and I had, the alphabet soup that you mentioned. This is an exact example of a guy who took a client who wanted an FDCPA claim and a TCPA claim. And he looked at it and decided, okay, I can go forward on the FDCPA claim. I feel like there's some legal merit to that. I'll represent you on that. But then the TCPA claim, he's like, I just don't see it. And this client was insistent. And so he pressed forward because of the statute of limitations on the one that he agreed and put in the scope of representation. I agree that I will represent you on this claim, but not the other one. And the client spent months emailing back and forth, calling, come on, you gotta take this, you gotta take this. He didn't. Later, he sued the attorney for malpractice, saying, you blew my ability to bring this claim, which had merit, you should have represented me. And I think the important thing in that case was that he documented in writing over and over, I've explained to you why I do not feel that this claim has merit. And it was easier for me to defend him by saying, an attorney does not have an obligation to take on a claim if they think it lacks merit. If anything, that would be sanctionable for bringing a frivolous claim. And I also give a lot of credit to that lawyer, because as demanding as this client was, and it was a continuing client because he was actually representing on one claim, he really stood his ground and just kind of took every email, every argument, and just said, no, I've reiterated this 100 times. So I think, again, sometimes it can be difficult if you're a younger lawyer or a solo practitioner to think, oh, well, this is a paycheck, or this is going to make it look like I'm bringing in business. But you do want to stand your ground if it's something you don't feel comfortable with.
Couple of comments from the web. One web viewer says, I agree with Gretchen. I have been practicing almost 20 years. My perception from WILMIC seminars has always been to not practice in any areas of law you are not familiar. That has been the consistent interpretation I have received. As a lawyer who has transitioned my practice up north, I have learned to reach beyond my, quote, comfort zone into other areas of law. This viewer also would like to see more solos up here who, the viewer says, would have to, quote, cautiously dabble. So that's a comment from the web. Thank you for contributing. And then another comment, networking with others is critical. Over the years, you develop or should develop a network to consult with, like the State Bar Lawyer Referral Service, and to refer out the cases that should be high risk of solo practitioners who have no one else to talk to or bounce ideas off of. Thank you, web viewers, for contributing. Comments, questions in the room? Okay.
We've got one, Tom.
Yes, go ahead, and then Katya will get you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've got a question about becoming competent. I know that I spent a large part of my career in criminal defense, taking a lot of public defender appointments, and they have a listserv, that kind of collegiality and bouncing ideas off of each other. And I don't know, a handful of years ago, somebody who had said, hey, I am trying to figure out this part of this case, was sanctioned for taking a case that she was not competent to handle. What do you do in that catch-22?
Any takers?
Well, I think the Supreme Court rules talk about if I took a case that I felt compelled to take, even if I felt I wasn't familiar enough with that area of law. I think the Supreme Court rules talk about the fact that when you bill a client for your services, you should not be billing them for getting up to speed with the law, to learn and to become competent. But in that scenario, I think you would have to take as much time as you need to become competent, even if it doesn't mean you're able to bill the client for it. You've got to bring yourself up to that level where you can meet your professional obligations.
And that's what the lawyer was attempting to do in the context of that listserv and got caught up in it. And it really, everybody else on the listserv was like, ah!
Yes, sir.
I guess my spin on that is the difference between before and after. If I accept a client knowing that I'm not competent in it, is different than if I go out and ask the listserv in advance of accepting that case. So, I guess, certainly the circumstances drives it, but had that same person done the listserv inquiry prior to agreeing to represent, I don't think there would have ever been a question about it.
I think there's some value in that suggestion, and that is that, we have many tools available to educate ourselves as lawyers in areas that we may not be as familiar in as we would like to be in order to accept a client. So crowdsourcing or using listservs is a very valuable tool, I think, in finding out more. It doesn't mean you don't do your homework, and it certainly isn't the be-all end-all or the some sort of conclusory effort that look, I'm not as familiar in this area, can you help? I think that's an important question to ask. But I want to back up to the web comment where the message from WILMIC seminars is that you don't practice in areas that you're not familiar with. That's not necessarily the only message. Again, we are simply identifying the risks and what they are, and that many of the claims that we deal with happen to come from areas in which lawyers dabble. So admittedly, dabbling I think is it's a dangerous exercise, but that doesn't mean that we're saying absolutely not, don't do it. And one of the things that I've learned in my couple of years at WILMIC, is that we help. And so I'll give you an example. One attorney contacted me. He had just returned from vacation, and his associate had failed to file a personal injury claim within the statute of limitations. Ouch, right? That's the error that happens. But this particular lawyer just wasn't aware of operations of Wisconsin statutes, which will breathe some more life and extend the statute of limitations if there's a payment made toward any part of the claim, including a property damage portion of it. So Brian Anderson helped me out with that. After I took the phone call, I spoke with him, called the insured back, and he was ecstatic. He was jumping up and down in his office, thanking us up and down. That's one of the ways that WILMIC can help. Okay, Brian's pretty nice. I'm really nice, but we can really help in areas because we do have so much exposure to so many different attorneys in so many different practice areas. And so when an issue comes up, and it might be in an area where the lawyer wants to take the case, maybe it's a really good opportunity. We can help establish networks. We can, offer whatever information or knowledge we have to help our insureds practice and practice competently. And that's really what we're getting at. It's not WILMIC's message that you be versed in the area of law that you're practicing in or in a case that you want to take on. Those are our own lawyers' rules. Those are our Supreme Court rules that we have to follow. So to the extent that, WILMIC is saying no, I don't think that's the message, and I hope everybody doesn't take that away from today. Rather, call me, call Brian, call somebody to find out more about the area you're in that you're not so comfortable in.
Brian is here and I think has a rebuttal. You're just as nice as Matt? Is that the...
You lost all credibility with that.
Yeah, I feared that.
My comment on...
Go ahead, Jay.
For what it's worth on dabbling, is I just don't see, if I were a solo, I don't see how I could be a bankruptcy lawyer and a family lawyer and in personal injury lawyer. That would be overwhelming for me. I think you can be a counselor and serve an important role by telling the client, you know what, I don't know the first thing about bankruptcy, but let's help hook you up with some group or some lawyer who can help you, and that's an important function too.
Yes.
I'd like to echo a little bit what Gretchen mentioned. I am probably not the youngest lawyer in the room, but I bet, the newest lawyer in the room. I just graduated 3 months ago. And I have to tell you, if I had to go to work feeling 100% confident about everything I was going to do that day, I would stay home and put the covers over my head because that's not how I feel. Granted, I practice criminal defense and guardian ad litem work. If someone asked me about business law, I would not hesitate to say, I'm not the right person to talk to you. But there are certainly criminal defense and guardian ad litem issues that I'm not completely competent in yet. And I don't think as a new graduate you can be completely competent. And so anything that WILMIC and the State Bar can do to support young lawyers, or new lawyers as I like to say, I think you should do, because it is a terrifying prospect, to be honest with you. And while I am working with somebody with 40 years of experience and a fantastic mentor, he can't be with me every day at every moment. And so if there are lots of resources available, that would be helpful for new lawyers, I think.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Getting into practice, especially if you're a solo, brand new, that can be a scary proposition. And we've all been there, I guess.
I'm not a solo, but it's a
well,
partnership,
okay.
but still.
Okay.
It's a small
Well,
firm.
I can tell you the first time I went into court, it was a temporary hearing on a divorce case, and the other attorney started talking. He was, he probably had 25 years of experience, and as he's talking, I'm thinking, wow, that doesn't sound right at all. This guy, where is he coming from? And then the court commissioner started looking at me, and his eyebrows started raising, and I thought, I think I'm supposed to object here. And so I said object, and the court commissioner said sustained. So it's a scary proposition. You don't feel on solid footing, and you're learning as you go. And Gretchen, I know your point. There are a lot of areas in the state where lawyers don't have the resources behind them, whether it's a big firm or a lot of different mentors available, and it's a tough thing. Katya and I went up last fall with the State Bar up north with a bus full of young lawyers to go into areas that are underserved, Ashland County and Bayfield and others, and it's definitely an issue out there. And we don't profess to have all the answers, but as Matt says, we want to help all of you find those answers. So it's not easy. And your points are well taken. Okay, other comments, questions on that? Okay, I just want to dive a little bit into time management. We have probably about 20 minutes to go. I want to talk work-life balance that Jay had talked about as well. But in terms of time management, I don't know, Eric and Sarah, you want to start first by talking about how you try to control your calendar. There may not be any such thing as actually controlling our calendars, but to the extent we can, how do we do that?
When I told people I was on a panel for a CLE about time management and work-life balance, they thought it was absolutely hilarious. Because I was like, you are the worst example, Sarah. But I guess I'm in a little bit of a unique position. I'm a single mom, I have 2 little kids, and I don't have a lot of the scheduling flexibility that some other people have, because I'm the one who's dropping kids off at school every morning. I have to be picking them up at a certain time. I can't always, log on at night to finish things up because they're 5 and 7. It's not like I can just shove them outside and say, see ya at 8, get up in your bed. I mean, I think that is a constant battle for me in explaining that, especially to a certain generation of lawyers who are used to just being at the office all the time, available all the time, expect those really, really high billable hours. But I just can't. And it's gotten so that there's sort of, everybody's on the same page now, that, there's a certain amount of work that I can do in a day. And I think it's important to look at each person's individual circumstances and realize, okay, this is what is going to, this amount of work or these amount of commitments or responsibilities, that's what they can handle. And to know right from the get-go what is too much, because once you get into that, I've got too many things going on, I'm juggling too much, that's when you're going to make stupid little mistakes, you're going to forget deadlines, it becomes a real problem. And then you can't adequately serve your clients. You're not giving them the time that they need, or the cases the time that they need. The one thing that I've tried really hard to do, because I work in litigation, is on every case when we sit down at the scheduling conference, I try to make sure that just because they're giving me a motion for summary judgment deadline and I don't have anything else on that day, I'm also looking at the rest of my calendar to see, well, what else do I have that month? Let's not get completely overloaded. Unfortunately, this summer is the worst example because I've had motion after motion, trial on Monday. But to the extent that I can have a little control over court deadlines, and I've been pretty open with judges at times like, well, why do you need an extra 30 days? And I'll say, well, I've got 15 other things that week. I'm sorry. I just, if there's no opposition from opposing counsel, what's the problem with it? And it usually is fine. So sometimes it's just asking for more time rather than feeling obligated or pressured to try to really funnel everything into the deadlines that you think you are required to follow.
Yeah, and I echo Sarah's comments as far as the deadlines and things of that nature. What I typically do is, and I started this at our old firm together, it's a practice that I think is really helpful, is to keep a paper calendar and also an Outlook calendar. And I make sure both of those are synced up to make sure I don't blow any deadlines. And then I also have a conference with my assistant maybe every week or so, or every 2 weeks, just kind of make sure that all of our deadlines are up to date and that nothing is missed. So it's kind of like with the 1999 when they said the calendars, the computers are all going to shut down. That's how I approach every day. I have to have a backup for my paper calendar. And also, I work in a firm where I have other attorneys, so if an emergency comes up, I can always have someone else cover for me. I know a lot of solo practitioners don't have that option, so you have to, plan your calendars accordingly. So I have a lot of ways that I try to cover myself to make sure that no deadlines are blown or anything like that. So.
Questions, comments on that? Okay, we're going to talk about work-life balance. I just want to swing back to technology for a minute. We're in this age of legal Zoom and self-help websites, Googling and all that stuff. I heard someone at a seminar talking about the best research people do now is by Googling. So how do you all, and I guess panel, please chime in here too, but so how do we, as a profession, embrace this new age? You know, LegalZoom is here to stay, it appears, as are many others. So lawyers don't have a corner on this information market any longer. So we have to serve clients in other ways. Am I right? We don't have all the information anymore? And so how can we be of best value to our clients?
I guess I tend to, because I do a lot of municipal work, civil rights defense, a lot of times we're drafting policies for instance, jails or a city department. And a lot of those are very easy to access online, especially because they are municipalities. They're interested in keeping costs low, and their thing is, well, why on earth shouldn't we just download these forms and pay, you know, a flat fee of whatever? And why would we retain you to draft these instead? And I think a lot of it comes down to giving them more personalized service, explaining to them why what they're going to get from those services might fill the gap or the need that they have, but then explaining to them, you know, well, these are the additional things that I can offer you. I'm going to come and visit and talk to people and see how this is actually going to work when we put it in place. And there's always going to be, you know, follow-up. You're offering them service, and kind of as Jay has said throughout, you're counseling them. You're an advisor. You're there as sort of you're a live, warm body. You're not just, you know, a computer screen. You've printed out 500 pages of policies, put them in a binder, and that's our HR policies. So I think a lot of times it becomes more the relationship. They appreciate having somebody who can address their personalized concerns because you're familiar with them.
Eric?
I kind of echo that as well. And then also another advantage is you can get these forms from online and things like that, but you can't account for changes in the law. Like, for instance, there's been changes to the Wisconsin Rules of Civil Procedure that took effect in April. So if there are changes in the law that these policies that you may be able to download from different sources can't take into account. So that's an added component that having an attorney on standby benefits your business. So.
We have about 10 minutes left, and so I do want to talk work-life balance, but I just want to remind all of you too, before we finish, if there are topics that we have not covered this morning at all, please feel free to jump in and throw that out there. We're happy to talk about it if it's something you don't want to leave here without hearing others talk about. So please jump in. All right. Before I get to work-life balance, there's one other I want to give these web viewers their say. This is a web viewer who is commenting on the issue of mentoring and getting advice from other lawyers. The comment is, share space with other lawyers and learn from them. That has served me well over the years. A senior lawyer helped me start out this way. He nursed me through my first jury trial, and it worked. Web comment, thank you for contributing. Now, work-life balance. Sarah, I'm going to start with you. Your outline, I thought, as I was reading through it, covered this pretty extensively, and there was a lot of good stuff in there. And I don't know if this is generational or not. Is it, do older or more experienced lawyers, did we come up in an era where we were expected to, you know, put in those 10 to 12-hour days and that's how you get ahead, and that younger millennials now are saying, you know, I want to go see my kid play soccer at 4:30 in the afternoon, and that's my priority at times. How is this working? I'd like to hear from all of you too, how we are coping with this work-life balance that seemingly has evolved a little bit over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely generational. When, you know, you go to the annual shareholder meeting, there's a lot of talk about, you know, billable hours and looking at, you know, what are the associates billing versus what are, you know, the shareholders billing. And you see the more senior attorneys, this trend of them continuing to bill those higher numbers, and associates understanding, getting the message that billable hours are important and working, but also I think they do have an appreciation for free time, the way that I think an older generation saw free time as laziness. You know, that you should never be bored. You should never not have something to do because there's always more to do. And I think that that's slowly shifting. But I think it is harder for younger lawyers to find a fit, whether it's a solo practice of their own where they can control how much they work, or a firm that will allow that kind of work-life balance. But I think regardless, you do have to find what works for you, or you're going to burn out so fast that you won't be a lawyer for very long. There's just no point.
So how do you manage this in your life? And then Eric, I'd like to get your thoughts on how you're managing this. I'm going to get to her after I hear from Sarah and Eric. Go ahead.
I just kind of came to my own personal acceptance of the fact that I'm never going to, you know, when you start out as a lawyer, you're thinking the more I work, the more money I'm going to make, go, 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 go. And I still feel go, 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 go. But I just kind of internally was like, okay, I'm not going to be one of those people who builds 2,500 hours, and that's okay. I think it's good to set goals for yourself, to understand that sometimes you're going to have a busier year than the next, but to just set your own boundaries. We talk about boundaries with clients, but to set boundaries with work. You know, if somebody emails me at 9:30 at night, I'm going to go to bed. I'll read it in the morning. Unless it's an emergency, you know, it can wait until I wake up at 6:30. So I think it's just important to sort of make your own goal and your own sort of time commitment to work, and then make sure that you are moving toward, if you're not already there, a position, a firm where that is accepted.
For me, I have a sort of unique story. I got into Marquette Law School. When I found out that I was admitted to law school, I found out that my now wife, but my girlfriend at the time, was pregnant. So at the time, you know, I started law school on a part-time program. So I had to manage my time where I was still working 40 hours a week at the firm that I was working at. I was going to law school 4 nights a week in the evenings, and I had a baby on the way. You know, so my thought process through law school was that, hey, I have to do these things that I need to do, but I also need to take time for me. And that's the approach that I have in practice. I have my daughter's, she'll be 12 this month, so she plays softball, she has drama club and things like that. So what I can do in my practice is I can go in early on those days where she's got events coming up, and I can go ahead and get my hours in, but I say I have to leave at this time. If someone else has to cover for me or something like that, if it's an emergency situation, I'll stay. But I let my partners and everyone know that, look, for these 2 months in the summer, this is what's going on. So I have to get out early and have to get to these games and things of that nature. So I had to carve out a time for me in the practice, just the same way I did when I was in law school. So that's the approach I have.
I think we need a more nuanced view of this, because it really isn't strictly generational, I think, because I started practicing law in 1978. And I can guarantee you that no one was working 80 hours a week back in 1978. Most lawyers went to work at 8 and they left at 5. And that's just the way it was. I really think if there were a study of this, they would find that it was when the mega firms started paying new associates a gazillion number of dollars that they expected those young associates to put in a gazillion number of hours, and the whole thing just sort of snowballed from there. Because I know if you come to Baraboo, Wisconsin this week, you will find that most lawyers get to work around 8 and leave around 5. We don't make a lot of money, but on the other hand, we don't have to talk about balance nearly as much.
Well, I think that's a really good point about the money, is at a certain point, you know, I remember being in law school and they, you know, warned you about the golden handcuffs and don't get trapped into this, you know, work, work, work so you can make more money, and then you get accustomed to the money, and then you buy the things that take the money, and then you need to keep working to maintain that lifestyle. And I think a lot of people are initially attracted to becoming a lawyer because they think they're going to be astronomically wealthy, and don't realize that that's not really the case anymore. But there's also a point where you find that, well, you might be at a point in your career where I could go somewhere else and like one of those giant mega firms and make more, but what is my life really going to be like? And if I'm satisfied and happy where I am now, the money's not worth it. I love the firm I work at because I have a lot of flexibility, I have a lot of autonomy, and that, for me, because I'm a single mom, that's what I need. And so that has a lot of value that if I went somewhere else and they paid me 20 grand more, it wouldn't make up for that because that's not what I need.
Jay, this sounds like the happy lawyer you were talking about. Am I right?
Happy lawyer. And the only comment I would make is it's not just my view. The American Bar Association released a well-being survey, I think in last year, maybe 2017. And their words, not mine, the profession is in crisis with high rates of depression, stress, burnout, compassion fatigue, substance abuse, suicide, much higher than the norm. So it's something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, statistically, the numbers still do show that this is a high-risk profession. Yes?
One of the things that I've experienced throughout my career is that when I started, the way that you communicated with clients was either through the U.S. mail, by phone, or in person. I mean, I predate fax machines. And what I've found presently is that the pressure of technology has created a real difficulty in trying to create that balance in my practice and life, because clients believe that if they text you, you're going to text them back 15 minutes later. And someone else said in the room that they're not a big technology person, and I'm not either. I never learned how to type, so doing emails is more difficult for me because I'm kind of a hunt and peck guy. And it's always easier for me to do it by phone. I'd like to talk to people. Plus, I can understand better what their demeanor is based on what I'm hearing. And so it's just the technology, I think, is forcing me to really work hard at trying to keep a life-work balance, because everything is coming at you so fast and in so many different ways. I've got to check 2 different voicemails, email, and once in a while text. I try not to let people text me. I just say, look, I don't look at text. I don't do text. Don't communicate with me that way. But it's very difficult just based on the technology that we have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a good point. I saw another hand, I think, over here.
The work-life balance, work and happiness outside of work, some of this is so gendered and still about politics of what goes on at home, and it feels to me like a lot of older attorneys who have expectations, whether they state them or they're implicit, about how you use your time. It's not just if you want to see your kids play soccer at 4:30, it's that stuff has to get done, and 2 people are working now instead of 1 in many households, and that it's not whether you're having fun outside of work or you're dedicated to your work or not, but there's a big gap sometimes, I think, between what understanding there is amongst older attorneys about what you have to do outside of work, not just what you're doing for fun. So I work at a place where people are very understanding, but a lot of my peers do not work at places where the boss is very understanding about that.
How about the connected 24 hours a day thing? Do any of you run into that challenge? Are you able to disconnect? I had a boss many years ago that once a summer, he'd go up north to his cabin where there was no newspapers, no internet, no cable TV, nothing. It sounded dreadful to me, but he loved it. He literally was disconnected for a week. I couldn't wake up one morning without getting the news, but it was, for him, it was very satisfying from a mental health perspective. So I don't know if many of you have that challenge of, I mean, we all can stay so connected now with our mobile devices, and that, I think, goes to what you're talking about, the technology driving us to be so responsive all the time and that sort of thing. So just my observation. Any other comments, questions? Yes, hang on for the mic here. Joe's gonna catch you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd make one comment about being hooked in all the time. One of them is Nancy Reagan's famous saying of just say no. You cannot be hooked in all the time and do the types of things that both Eric and Sarah are talking about, because otherwise you're not doing either thing very well, I don't think. Sarah made a real good point, I thought, about, you know, generational things and being hooked in, and I think you're right. I think people my age don't understand as well as they should what people your age think about these things. And I'll tell you, if you're a law firm and you don't adapt to the way you guys are thinking, you're losing out, because you're losing out on good people, because you got to look at quality versus quantity. And the last thing is, you know, I heard one comment from somebody today, I get back to people as soon as I can. I get clients all the time who will say, well, you haven't emailed me back on this today, or you haven't whatever. And I say, wouldn't you rather have a reasoned response on this and have me think about it before I get back to you, rather than just get back to you? And I think when you talk about boundaries and setting expectations, I think that's a good way of doing it.
I've actually had disagreements with people in my firm about, well, we just got an order in, it just got, you know, ECF notification email pops up, an hour passes, has this gotten sent to the client yet? And, you know, no, I haven't had a chance to read it. I'm going to read it and then send it later this afternoon. And his response is, well, they've been antsy, they need to know that something came in. And it's like, well, what point is it for me to write something and say, here's the order, period, send? I'm not giving them anything. I'm not adding any value to that. No analysis whatsoever. And so there is, I think, oftentimes this overarching focus on quick, rather than take that extra time to digest it and offer them the services that they're paying for, you know, rather than just forwarding emails.
Just a tip to help defray that a little bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with an acknowledgement. Simply saying, hey, I got this order. I will take some time to review it and get back to you with my thoughts, you know, at a later time. Or, hey, I got your email. You know, I will respond to it. I'm just in the middle of something else right now. Or something that will just at least inform the client that you're aware of it, you know it's there, and you'll hear from me shortly, I think goes a long way.
All right, any other comments, questions, any topics we haven't hit that you want to talk about? All right, we are out of time. I first want to thank Jay Reeves for coming up from North Carolina. Jay, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm not taking these records back, so
There are more records
anyone
available.
can have them.
And I want to thank Matt and Eric and Sarah very much. Please give them a round of applause as well. And thank you to all of you for coming out, and to those of you on the web for watching, and for commenting, questioning us, contributing. That's what makes this work. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. Have a great weekend.